Welcome, fellow dreamer. Tonight, we journey through the remarkable story of money. From the earliest exchanges of shells and grain to the invisible digits that flow through our world today, a tale of human ingenuity that has woven itself into the fabric of civilization. This exploration unfolds through soothing soundscapes and gentle abstract imagery, revealing fascinating fragments of history and little-known wonders that will quietly satisfy your curiosity as you drift toward peaceful rest. So take a deep breath, let yourself sink into comfort, and allow your mind and eyes to soften as the story begins to unfold. The world you inhabit today, with its bustling markets and glowing screens displaying numbers that represent value, would be utterly unrecognizable to your distant ancestors. To understand money, we must first travel backward through time to an age when the very concept of currency did not exist, when the human experience was fundamentally different from anything we know today. Imagine a time more than 10,000 years ago, long before the first cities rose from the earth, before the first crops were deliberately planted, before the first words were scratched onto clay or stone. In this ancient world, small groups of humans moved across landscapes that seemed infinite, following the rhythms of seasons and the migrations of animals. These were our prehistoric ancestors, and they lived in a manner so removed from modern existence that it requires a gentle stretching of imagination to picture their daily lives. These early people existed in small bands, typically numbering between 20 and 50 individuals. They were often related to one another through blood and kinship, forming tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone else from birth until death. In such intimate groups, survival depended not on wealth or possessions, but on knowledge, skill, and cooperation. When a person felt hungry, there was no shop to visit, no currency to exchange, no transaction to complete. Instead, hunger was satisfied through the direct interaction with the natural world. Men and women possessed an extraordinary understanding of their environment, knowledge accumulated over countless generations and passed down through demonstration and storytelling. They knew which plants bore edible roots and which brought sickness. They understood the habits of animals, the turning of seasons, and the signs that predicted rain or drought. The acquisition of food consumed much of their time and energy. Some members of the group might spend their days tracking game animals across vast distances, using weapons crafted from stone, wood, and bone. Others gathered seeds, nuts, fruits, and vegetables from the landscape, their trained eyes spotting nutritious plants that an untrained observer might walk past without noticing. Still others might fish in rivers and coastal waters, or collect shellfish from rocky shores. When food was obtained, it was shared. This sharing was not commerce, nor was it precisely charity as we might understand it today. Instead, it was simply the way communities functioned. A successful hunter did not own the meat from a large animal in any exclusive sense. The animal was butchered and distributed among the group according to customs and social bonds that had been established over generations. This sharing was practical, for meat spoils quickly, and storing it for long periods was impossible. Better to share abundantly when times were good, with the understanding that others would do the same when fortune favored them. Shelter, too, came not from builders hired with wages, but from communal effort and individual resourcefulness. People sought natural caves and rock overhangs, or constructed temporary dwellings from whatever materials the environment provided. In forested regions, branches and leaves formed simple structures. In colder climates, animal hides stretched over frames of wood or bone provided protection from harsh winds. On open plains, some groups dug partially into the earth itself, using the ground as insulation against temperature extremes. The tools that made life possible were created by those who used them. A person who needed a sharp edge for cutting would strike one stone against another, carefully fracturing the rock until it formed a blade. Someone requiring a container might weave grasses into a basket or hollow out a section of wood. Clothing came from animal skins, laboriously cleaned and softened through processes that required both skill and patience. In this world, there was no concept of wealth as we understand it. A person could not accumulate possessions beyond what they could carry, for the group was always moving, following food sources across the landscape. The notion of owning land would have seemed as strange as owning the sky or the wind. The territory a group moved through was theirs, in the sense that they knew it intimately and defended it from strangers. But it was not property that could be divided, sold, or inherited in any formal way. Specialization, that cornerstone of modern economies, barely existed. Everyone needed to know the essential skills of survival. While some individuals might have particular talents, becoming known as especially skilled trackers or gifted toolmakers, they still participated in the full range of activities necessary for life. There were no full-time craftspeople, no professional hunters who did only hunting, no specialists who could focus exclusively on a single task while others provided their food and shelter. This way of living placed natural limits on what human communities could achieve. Without the ability to store surplus reliably, without a means of trading specialized skills, without a way to accumulate resources for large projects, human societies remained small and technologically simple for thousands of generations. Innovation occurred, but slowly, spreading gradually through contact between groups over vast stretches of time. Yet within these constraints, humans were not merely surviving, but experiencing the full richness of existence. They told stories and sang songs. They decorated their bodies and their tools. They developed intricate social customs and spiritual beliefs. They formed deep bonds with one another, lived in intimate connection with the natural world, and possessed a kind of freedom that later, more complex societies would surrender. As the millennia passed, however, the human world was beginning to change in subtle ways. The last ice age was slowly releasing its grip on the planet. Climates were shifting, and with them, the distribution of plants and animals. Some human groups were beginning to notice patterns in how plants grew, beginning to observe which animals might be approached and which would always flee. In certain particularly abundant locations, some communities were finding that they could remain in one place for longer periods, returning to the same camps year after year. These gradual changes were setting the stage for a transformation that would reshape human existence entirely. Communities would grow larger, becoming too big for everyone to know everyone else personally. People would begin to stay in one place, building more permanent structures and cultivating plants rather than simply gathering them. And with these changes would come new challenges, new needs, and eventually, new solutions. The simple sharing that worked in a band of 30 people would become impractical in a village of 300. The groundwork was being laid for something unprecedented in human history: the need to exchange goods and services between people who were not bound by close kinship, who might not even know one another's names. As human communities grew beyond the intimate circles of extended families, something remarkable began to happen. People started to notice that they had created more of something than they needed, while their neighbors had surplus of something else entirely. The woman who had spent days weaving more baskets than her household could use might glance across the settlement and see a family with more dried fish than they could possibly eat before the next season. And in that observation, in that moment of recognition, the seeds of a new idea took root. The concept seems simple to us now, almost obvious. Yet for our ancestors, the notion of trading one thing for another represented a genuine leap in human thinking. It required imagining value as something that could move between people, that could transform from fish into baskets and back again. It meant trusting that what seemed useful to you might be equally valuable to someone else, and that both parties could walk away from an exchange feeling satisfied. In settlements along ancient riverbanks and in small villages that dotted prehistoric landscapes, these first tentative exchanges began to take place. A hunter who had brought down a large animal might share portions of meat with a toolmaker, who in return would craft a new spear point or cutting blade. A farmer with an abundant grain harvest might trade sacks of wheat to a potter in exchange for storage vessels. These transactions were often conducted face to face, between people who knew each other, who lived as neighbors, and would continue to see each other day after day. The barter system, as we now call it, represented humanity's first attempt to create an organized way of exchanging goods. It allowed for a kind of specialization that had been impossible before. A person could focus on becoming exceptionally skilled at one particular craft or method of food production, knowing that they could trade their surplus for the other necessities of life. The weaver could spend more time perfecting intricate patterns. The fisherman could venture further from shore. The farmer could tend larger fields. Yet as elegant as this solution appeared, those who lived within barter economies quickly discovered its limitations. The most fundamental challenge was what economists would much later call the double coincidence of wants. For a trade to occur, you needed to find someone who not only had what you wanted, but who simultaneously wanted what you had to offer. Imagine a sandal maker who needs grain for his family. He must locate a grain farmer who happens to need new sandals at precisely that moment. If the farmer's sandals are still in good condition, no trade can occur, no matter how desperately the sandal maker needs to feed his children. This problem grew more complicated as communities expanded and the variety of goods increased. A toolmaker might create an excellent axe, but if she needs cloth, she must find a weaver who needs an axe. If the weaver doesn't need an axe but needs pottery, the toolmaker must first trade her axe for something the weaver does want, adding layers of complexity to what should be a simple exchange. Some historians believe that elaborate chains of trades developed, where goods might pass through several hands before reaching their ultimate destination, each person in the chain making a small exchange to move closer to obtaining what they truly needed. The timing of needs created another obstacle. Harvest seasons didn't align with the continuous, year-round needs of craftspeople. A farmer with wheat to trade had his surplus all at once, during and immediately after harvest. But his needs for tools, clothing, and other goods spread throughout the year. How could he trade his grain when he had it for goods he would need months later? Some communities developed informal credit systems, where trades were remembered and reciprocated when the time was right. But this required strong social bonds and excellent memories. Then there was the question of value equivalence. How many baskets equal one goat? How much grain equals a clay pot? Without standardized measures of value, each transaction required negotiation. The relative worth of items could vary dramatically based on immediate circumstances. After a successful group hunt, meat might be abundant and therefore less valuable, while during lean times, the same amount of meat might command a much higher price in trade. A tool might be precious to someone who needed it urgently, but nearly worthless to someone who had just acquired a similar implement. The indivisibility of certain goods posed yet another challenge. Large items like livestock couldn't easily be divided for smaller transactions. A family might need only a small amount of grain, but if all they had to trade was a cow, they faced an awkward imbalance. They couldn't trade half a living cow for a sack of wheat. Some communities addressed this by making broader, less precise exchanges, accepting that trades wouldn't always be perfectly equal, trusting that imbalances would even out over time through social relationships and repeated interaction. Perishability added another layer of difficulty. Someone with fresh fish or ripe fruit needed to trade quickly before their goods spoiled. This urgency put them at a disadvantage in negotiations. They might have to accept unfavorable terms simply because waiting was not an option. Meanwhile, those offering durable goods like tools or pottery could afford to be patient, waiting for the most advantageous trading opportunities to present themselves. Despite these challenges, barter systems persisted for thousands of years across countless human societies. People developed ingenious workarounds and social customs to smooth the rough edges of direct exchange. Communities held market days when many people gathered, increasing the likelihood of finding suitable trading partners. Social networks formed where individuals kept mental accounts of who owed what to whom, creating webs of obligation and reciprocity that transcended immediate exchanges. Trusted intermediaries sometimes emerged, individuals who would accept goods they didn't personally need, knowing they could trade them onward to others. In some societies, certain individuals became known for maintaining stores of various goods, acting as informal clearinghouses where multiple people could make exchanges. If you couldn't find someone who wanted your fish, but had the grain you needed, perhaps you could trade your fish to this central figure for something more universally desired, then trade that item for grain later. These individuals performed a crucial economic function, though they probably didn't think of themselves in such formal terms. The archaeological record hints at these ancient trading networks. Obsidian from volcanic regions has been found hundreds of miles from its source. Shells from coastal areas appear in inland settlements. Copper and other metals traveled along trade routes that connected distant communities. Each of these objects represents not just a single exchange, but likely a chain of trades, goods passing from hand to hand across landscapes and between cultures. As generations passed and human settlements grew into towns and eventually cities, the limitations of barter became increasingly apparent. The very success of these growing communities, with their ever greater specialization and diversity of goods and services, made the double coincidence of wants problem ever more difficult to solve. The stage was being set for the next innovation in humanity's relationship with exchange, one that would emerge from the practical frustrations of trying to trade in an increasingly complex world. As human communities discovered the practicalities of exchanging one item for another, they gradually began to notice that certain goods move through their societies more fluidly than others. While a skilled artisan might craft a beautiful clay pot, finding someone who both wanted that particular pot and had precisely what the potter needed in return remained a persistent challenge. But some items, by their very nature and the universal needs they fulfilled, became easier to trade, more widely desired, and ultimately transformed into something more than mere goods. They became the first forms of money. In the vast grasslands where nomadic peoples moved with the seasons, cattle represented wealth in its most tangible form. A cow or an ox provided milk, labor for pulling plows or carts, leather for clothing and shelter, and eventually meat. The word capital itself traces its origins back to the Latin word for head, as in heads of cattle, reminding us still of this ancient connection between livestock and wealth. Among these pastoral communities, a person's status could be measured by the size of their herds, and debts, dowries, and disputes might all be settled with the transfer of animals from one family to another. The advantages of using cattle as a medium of exchange were clear to these ancient peoples. Cows could walk themselves to a transaction, requiring no cart or carriers. They reproduced, potentially increasing wealth over time. Everyone understood their value because everyone needed what cattle provided, yet the limitations were equally apparent. Cattle could not be divided for smaller purchases. They required feeding and care. They could fall ill or die, and their value fluctuated with age, health, and quality, making standardization impossible. In the fertile river valleys, where agriculture took root and flourished, grain emerged as another form of commodity money. In ancient Mesopotamia, barley became a standard measure of value, stored in temple granaries and palace storehouses. Workers received rations of grain as payment for their labor. A cuneiform tablet from Sumeria, dating back more than 4,000 years, records transactions measured in volumes of barley, carefully noting debts and payments with the precision of practiced accountant. The appeal of grain as currency made practical sense to these agricultural societies. Everyone needed to eat, making grain universally desirable. It could be measured in quantities ranging from handfuls to warehouse-sized stores, allowing for transactions both small and large. The temples and palaces that stored grain provided a kind of early banking service, accepting deposits and issuing receipts. These clay tablets, marked with the amount of grain held in storage, could themselves be traded, representing the value they described without the need to physically move heavy sacks of wheat or barley. Along coastlines and near rivers where mollusks thrived, shells became treasured objects of exchange. Cowrie shells, small and glossy, with their distinctive shape and natural beauty, circulated as currency across vast regions. In ancient China, cowrie shells served as money for centuries, and the Chinese character for money originally depicted a cowrie shell, a linguistic fossil preserving this monetary history. These shells traveled inland along trade routes, sometimes reaching communities hundreds of miles from any ocean, where their exotic origin only enhanced their perceived value. The durability of shells made them ideal for this purpose. Unlike grain, they would not spoil or rot. Unlike cattle, they required no feeding or care. They could be counted, strung together on cords, or for easy carrying and accounting, and their relative scarcity in inland areas helped maintain their value. In the Maldive Islands, cowrie shells were harvested in such quantities that they became a major export, spreading across the Indian Ocean trade networks, and eventually reaching as far as Africa, where they served as currency well into the 19th century. In the mountains and regions where salt deposits could be found, or where seawater could be evaporated, salt emerged as another commodity with monetary characteristics. Roman soldiers famously received part of their pay in salt, a practice that gave us the word salary. Salt preserved food in ages before refrigeration, making it not merely desirable but essential for survival through long winters or extended journeys. A merchant with salt had something everyone needed, and the difficulty of obtaining it in many regions ensured its continued value. Cakes of compressed salt were transported along ancient trade routes, their standardized sizes making transactions simpler. In the scorching deserts of the Sahara, caravans carried salt southward from coastal evaporation ponds or desert mines to trade with communities that had gold but lacked this essential preservative. The exchange rate between salt and gold in some regions would astonish modern observers, with salt sometimes commanding extraordinary prices in areas where it was scarce. In the dense forests and along the coasts of what would later be called North America, indigenous peoples developed their own sophisticated forms of commodity money. Wampum, crafted from carefully shaped and polished beads made from the shells of whelks and quahog clams, took considerable time and skill to produce. The beads were woven into belts with intricate patterns that could record treaties, tell stories, and represent significant wealth. The purple beads, rarer than the white ones, held greater value, and the amount of labor required to create wampum helped regulate its supply. Cacao beans in the civilizations of Mesoamerica circulated as currency long before chocolate became a beloved confection in other parts of the world. The Maya and Aztec peoples valued these beans not only for the bitter drink they could produce, but as countable units of value. Markets throughout these empires saw daily transactions conducted in cacao beans, with prices for everything from a turkey to a slave recorded in terms of how many beans they cost. The beans were small enough for minor purchases, yet valuable enough that larger transactions remained feasible. Each of these commodity currencies arose organically from the needs and resources of particular cultures. No central authority decreed that shells or salt should serve as money. Instead, through countless individual transactions and collective recognition of usefulness, certain goods naturally assumed this role. They shared common characteristics that made them suitable. They were durable enough to store without immediate decay. They were portable enough to carry to market. They were divisible, at least to some degree, allowing for transactions of varying sizes. They held intrinsic value, useful in themselves beyond their role as exchange media. And crucially, communities agreed collectively on their worth. Yet even as these commodity currencies solved many problems that had plagued pure barter, they introduced new challenges. Cattle and grain required storage and care. Shells might crack. Salt could dissolve in rain. Determining quality and authenticity became important. 3 bags of grain might look identical, but differ in their actual nutritional value. A cowrie shell might be damaged in ways not immediately visible. The weight of accumulated commodity money became burdensome for anyone attempting to complete larger transactions or transport substantial wealth. These limitations would eventually inspire humans to seek better solutions, to find materials and methods that preserve the benefits of commodity money while overcoming its inherent constraints. But for centuries upon centuries, in communities scattered across every inhabited continent, these commodities served their purpose admirably. They allowed trade to flourish beyond what simple barter could achieve. They enabled the accumulation of wealth and the settlement of debts. They helped economies grow more complex and societies more specialized. As people conducted their daily commerce with shells jingling in pouches and grain measured in bowls, they were participating in one of humanity's most significant innovations, learning lessons about value and exchange that would echo through all subsequent monetary developments. As communities around the ancient world became more familiar with using valuable commodities as a medium for trade, something remarkable began to happen in the workshops of early metalworkers. The same artisans who had been crafting tools, weapons, and decorative objects from copper and bronze started to recognize that metal itself could serve as a far more practical form of money than cattle, grain, or shells ever could. The transformation didn't happen overnight, nor did it occur in just one place. In the great river valleys of Mesopotamia, along the banks of the Nile in Egypt, and in the distant lands of early China, metal workers discovered that they could create standardized pieces of metal that held consistent value. These weren't yet the stamped coins we'll encounter later in our story, but rather carefully measured amounts of copper, bronze, and sometimes iron that people could trust to represent a certain worth. In ancient Mesopotamia, around 4,000 years ago, merchants and traders began using copper as a standard measure of value alongside the silver and barley that had served them before. The advantage of copper was immediately apparent to anyone who handled it. Unlike grain, which could spoil or be eaten by pests, copper didn't deteriorate with time. Unlike cattle, which needed feeding and could fall ill, a piece of copper required no care at all. It simply existed, unchanging and patient, waiting to be exchanged. The temple scribes of Mesopotamian cities kept meticulous records on their clay tablets, documenting transactions that involved copper pieces of specific weights. A worker might receive his wages calculated in measures of copper. A farmer might price his harvest in terms of how much copper it was worth. The metal became a language everyone could understand, a common denominator that made the complex calculations of trade far simpler than they had ever been before. Across the ancient Near East, bronze began to play a similar role. This alloy of copper and tin was harder and more durable than pure copper, making it especially valuable for tools and weapons. But its usefulness didn't stop there. Metalworkers learned to cast bronze into standardized shapes. that could be easily recognized and valued. Some took the form of small ingots, as others resembled miniature tools or other objects, each representing an agreed-upon value within their community. In ancient Egypt, where the pharaohs commanded vast construction projects and maintained complex administrative systems, copper and bronze served essential functions in the economy. Workers who built the pyramids and temples received their compensation partly in bread and beer, but also in copper rings and other metal pieces that they could later exchange for whatever they needed. The metal was durable enough to save for future needs, divisible enough to use for both large and small transactions, and valuable enough that even small amounts could purchase necessary goods. The genius of metal money lay in its measurability. A piece of grain might be larger or smaller, damper or drier. A cow might be healthy or sickly, young or old. But metal could be weighed with precision on the bronze scales that merchants carried. If a transaction called for a certain weight of copper, both buyer and seller could verify that weight and feel confident in the fairness of their exchange. This verifiability created trust, and trust allowed trade to flourish across greater distances and between people who had never met before. In the distant reaches of ancient China, a parallel story was unfolding. Chinese metalworkers, working independently from their counterparts in the Near East, developed their own sophisticated approach to metal money. They created bronze pieces in various shapes, some resembling the cowrie shells that had long served as currency in their region, others taking the form of miniature spades or knives. These weren't random shapes chosen for decoration, but rather forms that connected the new metal money to the familiar objects and older forms of currency that people already understood and trusted. The development of metal money required more than just metalworking skill. It demanded mining operations to extract ore from the earth, smelting facilities to transform that ore into pure metal, and workshops where artisans could shape the metal into usable forms. Each step in this process required specialization, and each specialist needed to be compensated for their work. In a beautiful circularity, the creation of metal money both required and enabled a more complex, specialized economy than had ever existed before. Iron eventually joined copper and bronze as a form of metal money in some regions, though its role was often more limited. Iron was abundant and useful for tools and weapons, but it had a troublesome tendency to rust when exposed to moisture. This made it less ideal as a store of value over long periods. Nevertheless, in areas where iron was particularly plentiful, or where copper and bronze were scarce, people found ways to incorporate iron into their monetary systems, often using it for smaller, everyday transactions, while reserving more precious metals for larger exchanges. The standardization that metal money enabled rippled through ancient societies in profound ways. When everyone agreed that a certain weight of copper or bronze held a certain value, it became possible to establish consistent prices for goods and services. A baker could know what to charge for bread, a potter for a vessel, a weaver for cloth. This predictability made economic planning possible in ways that had been unimaginable under pure barter systems, or even with less standardized commodity money. As metal money became more established, something else began to emerge that would prove equally important for the future of currency: the concept of a monetary authority. Temples, palaces, and ruling powers started to involve themselves in ensuring the quality and weight of metal used in exchanges. They had good reason to do so. Fair and honest weights in metal money helped maintain social order and fostered the trade that brought prosperity to their territories. When a temple or palace guaranteed that a piece of metal met certain standards, people could trade with greater confidence, knowing that a trusted authority stood behind the currency they used. The night deepens around us as we consider how these ancient innovations with copper, bronze, and iron laid foundations that still support our monetary systems today. Those careful metal workers, measuring and weighing, creating standardized forms that people could trust, were solving problems that every society faces. How to store value across time, how to measure worth consistently, and how to enable strangers to trade fairly with one another. In the glow of their forge fires, in the precision of their scales, in the steady accumulation of metal pieces that represented not just material worth, but human agreement and trust, we can see the outlines of all the sophisticated currencies that would follow in the centuries to come. As the ancient world moved through the centuries with metal serving as a medium of exchange, communities across the Mediterranean and Near East faced a persistent challenge. Each piece of metal used in trade needed to be weighed and tested for purity with every transaction. A merchant receiving a lump of silver for a shipment of olive oil couldn't simply accept it at face value. The metal had to be placed on scales, compared against standard weights, and sometimes assayed to determine if it was pure or mixed with less valuable materials. This process took time, required expertise, and created opportunities for disagreement and mistrust. In the bustling markets of ancient cities, specialized money changers set up their tables, equipped with scales, weights, and the knowledge to evaluate metal quality. These individuals became essential intermediaries in commerce, but their services added cost and complexity to every exchange. A farmer bringing grain to sell might wait while his payment was carefully measured and tested. A craftsman purchasing leather might watch suspiciously as the seller examined his offered metal, wondering if it would be accepted or rejected as impure. Around the year 600 BCE, in the prosperous kingdom of Lydia, located in what is now Western Turkey, someone conceived of a remarkable solution to this ongoing problem. The Lydians lived in a land rich with natural resources, where rivers carried electrum, a naturally occurring mixture of gold and silver, down from the mountains. They had already been using pieces of this precious metal in trade, but King Alyattes, and later his son Croesus, took the innovation further than anyone had before. The Lydian rulers began producing small, standardized pieces of electrum, each stamped with an official mark of the kingdom. These weren't simply chunks of metal. They were carefully measured to contain specific amounts of the precious material, and the royal stamp served as a guarantee of their weight and purity. For the first time in human history, people could conduct transactions without weighing and testing metal with each exchange. The stamp of the king promised that the piece contained what it claimed to contain. These early coins were bean-shaped lumps, far from the perfect circles we might imagine today. The marks stamped into them were often simple designs, lion heads being particularly common in Lydia, representing royal authority and power. The process of making them involved heating the electrum until it was soft enough to stamp, then striking it with engraved dies that left their impression on the metal surface. The advantages of this innovation became apparent almost immediately. A merchant could now conduct business more quickly, accepting coins without the need for scales and testing equipment. A traveler could carry wealth in a more reliable form, knowing that these coins would be accepted at their stated value wherever the authority of Lydia was recognized. The efficiency of trade increased dramatically, and commerce flourished in new ways. The idea spread with remarkable speed through the Greek world. The Greek city-states, with their extensive trade networks and sophisticated economies, recognized the brilliance of the Lydian innovation. Within a few decades, cities across the Aegean were producing their own coins, each bearing distinctive marks that identified their origin. Athens stamped its coins with an owl, the symbol of the goddess Athena. Corinth used the winged horse Pegasus. Aegina depicted a sea turtle on its coins. Each city's coinage reflected not just economic practicality, but civic pride and identity. The images on coins became a form of communication, broadcasting a city's power, religious devotions, and cultural values. When a traveler from a distant land saw an Athenian coin with its distinctive owl, they immediately knew something about where that coin originated and could make judgments about its reliability based on Athens' reputation. The technology of coin production evolved rapidly during these early centuries. Mints became more sophisticated, developing techniques for creating more uniform and precisely measured coins. The dies used to stamp them grew more elaborate and artistic, transforming coins into miniature works of art. Some of the ancient Greek coins that survive today are considered masterpieces of engraving, their tiny surfaces bearing portraits and scenes of extraordinary detail and beauty. The standardization that coins provided did something profound to the ancient economy. It made accumulation easier, as wealth could now be stored in a form that was both compact and universally recognized. It facilitated taxation, as governments could now demand payment in specific coin denominations, rather than accepting various goods or unmeasured metals. It enabled the emergence of more complex pricing systems, with goods and services assigned values that could be expressed in standard units. The Persian Empire, which eventually conquered Lydia in 546 BCE, embraced the concept of coinage and spread it even further. The Persian daric, a gold coin introduced by King Darius V, became one of the most trusted currencies of the ancient world, accepted by traders from India to Egypt. The image on the daric showed the Persian king as a warrior with bow and spear, a reminder that currency and political power were intimately connected. In the Greek colonies of southern Italy and Sicily, cities produced some of the largest and most beautiful coins of the ancient world. These silver pieces, sometimes as large as a modern cookie, were stamped with elaborate scenes and became valued not just for their metal content, but as prestige objects in their own right. The invention of coinage represented more than just a technical improvement in how people exchanged goods. It fundamentally altered the relationship between individuals and wealth, between citizens and their governments, and between different peoples engaged in trade. A coin was a promise, backed by the authority that issued it. When someone accepted a coin in payment, they were placing trust not just in the metal itself, but in the continued stability and honesty of the issuing power. As coins circulated through the ancient Mediterranean world, they carried with them ideas, artistic styles, and political messages. A merchant in Alexandria might handle coins from dozens of different cities and kingdoms, each one a small ambassador from distant places. The universal acceptance of the concept of coinage, even as individual coinages remained distinct, created a common language of value that transcended local customs and languages. The transformation that began in Lydia around 600 BCE would continue to unfold over the following centuries, as the technology and concept of coinage refined itself and spread to encompass ever larger portions of the inhabited world. What started as a practical solution to the problems of weighing and testing metal became one of the foundational technologies of civilization, enabling forms of economic organization and exchange that would have been impossible in earlier ages. As the innovation of coined money spread outward from Lydia through the Greek world, another civilization was watching, learning, and preparing to take the concept of currency to unprecedented heights. Far to the west, across the Mediterranean Sea, a city that had begun as a small settlement on 7 hills along the Tiber River was growing into something extraordinary. Rome would not merely adopt the monetary innovations of others, it would create a financial system so sophisticated that its influence would echo through the centuries, long after the last emperor had fallen. The Romans understood something fundamental about money that many civilizations before them had only grasped intuitively. Currency was not simply a convenience for merchants. It was a tool of empire, a means of binding distant territories together, and a reflection of state power itself. When Roman coins traveled, so too did Roman authority, Roman culture, and Roman values. In the early days of the Republic, before Rome had conquered much beyond central Italy, the Romans used heavy bronze bars called ius signatum, marked with simple designs. These were cumbersome things, weighing several pounds each, impractical for everyday transactions, but sufficient for a society that still conducted much of its business through traditional networks of obligation and patronage. But as Rome's ambitions grew, so too did the need for a more refined monetary system. The turning point came during the bitter conflicts with Carthage, those long wars that would determine the future of the Mediterranean world. Financing military campaigns across the sea required something more flexible than bronze bars. Around 211 BCE, the Romans introduced a new silver coin that would become the backbone of their economy for centuries to come. They called it the denarius, and it was worth 10 bronze asses. The smaller coins used for everyday purchases. A Roman soldier could expect to receive 1 denarius for a day's service, enough to buy his bread, his wine, and perhaps a few modest comforts. The denarius was a marvel of practical design. It contained approximately 4.5 grams of pure silver, stamped on one side with the head of the goddess Roma, and on the other with images that varied over time, depicting gods, heroes, and eventually the faces of living men who held power in the Republic. These coins were small enough to carry easily, yet valuable enough to facilitate substantial transactions. A farmer could sell his grain harvest for denarii. A merchant could purchase a shipload of olive oil. A tax collector could gather the revenues of an entire province and transport that wealth back to Rome in manageable chests. But the true genius of the Roman monetary system lay not in any single coin, but in how the system functioned across vast distances. As Roman legions pushed the boundaries of their territory outward, conquering Gaul and Spain, Greece and Egypt, Syria and Britain, Roman coins followed in their wake. A denarius minted in Rome could be spent in Alexandria or London, in Jerusalem or Carthage. The same silver coin might pass through a dozen hands in a dozen provinces, always recognized, always accepted, always holding its value. This universality of Roman currency did more than facilitate trade. It created a sense of shared economic space, a feeling that despite differences in language and custom, all these diverse peoples were part of a single economic system. A merchant in Antioch and a wine seller in Gaul both calculated their profits in the same units. They both saved for the future in the same silver coins. The empire became not just a political reality, but an economic one, bound together by currency as surely as by roads and aqueducts. The Romans minted other coins as well, each serving its purpose in the intricate dance of commerce. The golden aureus represented larger wealth, worth 25 denarii, used for significant transactions and stored as savings by those fortunate enough to possess them. The bronze as, and its smaller divisions, the semis and the quadrans, handled the small exchanges of daily life, buying a loaf of bread or a cup of wine at a tavern. Together, these coins created a complete monetary system, flexible enough to handle transactions both grand and humble. Managing this vast currency system required remarkable organization. Mints operated across the empire, from Rome itself to provincial centers, each producing coins that bore the marks of their origin. Quality control was essential. Citizens needed to trust that a denarius would contain the proper amount of silver, that the state stood behind the value stamped upon each piece. Counterfeiting was punished severely, for to debase the currency was seen as an attack on Rome itself. The government spent these coins freely, paying soldiers and civil servants, funding the construction of roads and bridges, aqueducts and forums. Money flowed from the treasury outward through thousands of channels, circulating through the economy before returning in the form of taxes. It was a grand cycle, and for centuries it functioned with remarkable efficiency. Yet even the Romans could not entirely resist the temptation that has challenged every government that has ever controlled a currency. As the empire aged and its expenses grew, emperors began to face a persistent problem: the costs of maintaining the legions, of feeding the city of Rome with its free grain distributions, of building monuments to imperial glory. All of this required more money than the treasury sometimes possessed. War and plague diminished the workforce. Barbarian invasions disrupted trade. The easy conquests of earlier centuries, which had brought vast quantities of gold and silver flowing into Roman coffers, came to an end. The solution seemed simple enough. Rather than reduce spending, officials began adding less silver to each denarius. At first, the changes were subtle, perhaps hardly noticeable. A coin that had once been nearly pure silver might now contain just a small amount of base metal. But over the decades and centuries, the debasement accelerated. By the 3rd century of the Common Era, the denarius contained barely any silver at all, just a thin silver wash over a copper core. The effects rippled through the economy like waves spreading across a still pond. Merchants raised their prices, To compensate for the reduced value of the coins they received, people hoarded older coins with higher silver content, keeping them out of circulation. The government responded by demanding more coins in taxes, which only accelerated the cycle of debasement and inflation. What had once been a stable currency, trusted and accepted throughout the known world, gradually lost the confidence that had given it power. Even as the monetary system showed these signs of strain, the fundamental achievement remained. For half a millennium, Rome had demonstrated that currency could unite an empire, that a well-managed monetary system could facilitate commerce across continents, and that money itself could be an instrument of governance as important as any law or legion. The lessons of Roman finance would not be forgotten, even as the empire itself transformed and eventually fragmented into the kingdoms and territories that would shape the medieval world. As the Roman Empire flourished in the West, remarkable innovations in currency were unfolding across the vast landscapes of Asia, where civilizations of equal sophistication were developing their own distinctive approaches to money and exchange. In ancient China, a tradition of bronze casting that stretched back thousands of years would give birth to one of the most recognizable and enduring forms of currency the world has ever known. As early as the 11th century, before the Common Era, during the late Shang dynasty, the Chinese were already experimenting with standardized bronze objects as mediums of exchange. These early forms took shapes that reflected the commodities they replaced. Miniature spades and knives, cast in bronze, circulated as money throughout various kingdoms and regions. The spade coins, known as bubi, were flat and roughly shaped like the agricultural tools that were so vital to Chinese civilization. The knife coins, or daobi, featured a ring at one end for stringing them together, making them easier to carry and count. But it was during the Warring States period, an era of both conflict and tremendous innovation, that Chinese monetary design began to evolve into something more practical and elegant. Different states minted different styles, creating a bewildering variety of shapes and standards that complicated trade across regions. When the Qin dynasty unified China in 221 BCE, one of Emperor Qin Shi Huang's many standardization reforms addressed this monetary chaos. He introduced a unified copper coin that would influence Chinese currency design for more than 2,000 years, a round disc with a square hole in its center. This design was both practical and symbolic. The round shape represented heaven in Chinese cosmology, while the square hole represented the earth. The hole served a thoroughly practical purpose as well, allowing coins to be threaded onto strings in groups of 1,000, creating a standard unit of account that made large transactions far more manageable. These strings of coins, known as chuan, could be carried over the shoulder or stored in organized bundles. The system was so efficient that it persisted through dynasty after dynasty, with various emperors adding their own inscriptions and marks, but maintaining the fundamental design. The Chinese approach to metallic currency differed significantly from Western traditions in another important way. While Mediterranean civilizations generally favored precious metals like silver and gold for their coins, China relied primarily on bronze and copper for everyday transactions. This wasn't due to any shortage of precious metals, but rather reflected a different philosophy about the relationship between currency and intrinsic value. The Chinese system depended more heavily on the authority of the state to guarantee value rather than the material worth of the metal itself, a concept that would much later become universal with modern fiat currencies. Meanwhile, in the Indian subcontinent, monetary traditions were developing along yet another path. The earliest Indian coins, appearing around the 6th century BCE, were punch-marked silver pieces known as karshapanas. Unlike the carefully molded coins of Lydia or the cast bronze of China, these were simply flat pieces of silver bearing several stamped symbols that authenticated their weight and purity. The symbols varied by region and authority, featuring animals, geometric patterns, and religious imagery that reflected the diverse cultures across the Indian kingdoms. These punch-marked coins circulated widely across ancient India, facilitated by the expanding networks of trade that connected the subcontinent to Central Asia, Persia, and eventually, through the Silk Road, to China and the Mediterranean world. Indian merchants and traders became renowned throughout the ancient world for their commercial acumen, and their monetary practices influenced regions far beyond their borders. The Silk Road itself, that legendary network of trade routes connecting east and west, became not merely a conduit for silk, spices, and precious goods, but also a pathway for the exchange of monetary ideas and practices. As merchants traveled these routes, they encountered different currency systems and had to develop methods for converting and exchanging various forms of money. Caravanserais, the roadside inns that dotted the Silk Road, often served as informal exchange centers, where traders from different regions negotiated the relative values of Chinese bronze coins, Indian silver, Persian gold, and Roman denarii. The interaction between these monetary systems revealed fascinating differences in how civilizations conceptualized value and exchange. Chinese merchants, accustomed to their standardized bronze coins, sometimes puzzled over the Western emphasis on precious metals. Western traders, in turn, had to adapt to Eastern systems where the authority backing the currency might matter more than the material it was made from. These cross-cultural encounters gradually led to a more sophisticated understanding of money itself as an abstraction, the agreed-upon system of value that could take many different physical forms. In Southeast Asia, the influence of both Indian and Chinese monetary traditions blended with local practices. Kingdoms in present-day Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia adopted and adapted coinage designs from their larger neighbors, while maintaining their own unique symbols and standards. The maritime trade networks of the region, connecting ports from India to China and beyond, created additional demands for portable, recognizable forms of currency that could facilitate transactions across cultural boundaries. Japan, though more isolated than mainland Asian civilizations, eventually imported the Chinese model of round bronze coins with square holes during the 8th century of the Common Era. Japanese coins often bore inscriptions indicating the era of their minting, and they circulated alongside other forms of value such as rice, which remained an important medium of exchange in the agricultural economy. The Japanese relationship with coinage would prove intermittent over the centuries, with periods of active minting alternating with eras when imported Chinese coins dominated circulation. Korea similarly adopted Chinese-style bronze coins, though Korean monetary history showed periods of reliance on cloth and grain as currencies. Particularly during times when metallic currency became scarce. These fluctuations remind us that even as sophisticated monetary systems developed, older forms of commodity money never entirely disappeared, remaining as backup systems when circumstances demanded. The diversity of Asian monetary innovations demonstrates that there was no single path in the evolution of money. Each civilization developed systems suited to their particular needs, resources, and philosophical frameworks. Yet through trade and cultural exchange, these different traditions influenced one another, gradually creating a more interconnected economic world, where the concept of money, in all its various physical forms, became a universal language of value and exchange. As centuries passed and these Asian monetary traditions matured, they would eventually encounter the evolving currency systems of medieval Europe, creating new chapters in the ongoing story of money's development across human civilization. As the great innovations of Asian monetary systems flourished across the East, a different story was unfolding across the Mediterranean and into the heart of Europe. The centuries following the fall of Rome had left the continent fragmented into countless kingdoms, duchies, and principalities, each navigating its own relationship with money and commerce. This was an age of stone castles and monastery bells, of merchants traveling dusty roads and coins changing hands in busy market squares. In the eastern reaches of what had been the Roman Empire, the city of Constantinople stood as a beacon of continuity. Here, the Byzantine Empire maintained traditions that stretched back centuries, and nowhere was this more evident than in their currency. The gold solidus, introduced by Constantine the Great, had evolved into the coin known throughout medieval Europe as the bezant. For over 700 years, this remarkable coin maintained its weight and purity with almost unwavering consistency. Merchants from London to Baghdad knew its value, and the golden bezant became a standard against which other currencies were measured. The stability of this currency reflected the sophisticated administration of Byzantium, where government officials carefully monitored the mints and maintained reserves of precious metals. Westward, in the lands that would become modern England, France, and Germany, the monetary landscape looked quite different. The grand unified currency of Rome had splintered into countless local variations. In England, the silver penny became the foundation of the monetary system. These pennies were remarkably thin and broad, struck from silver with enough force to imprint the design on both sides. The penny was so ingrained in English commerce that for centuries it remained the only coin regularly minted in the kingdom. When people needed to make smaller transactions, they would literally cut the penny into halves or quarters, creating the halfpenny and farthing, a word derived from forthing. The production of these coins was a carefully controlled affair. In England, moneyers worked under royal supervision, their names often appearing on the coins themselves as a guarantee of authenticity. These craftsmen faced severe penalties for producing underweight or impure coins. The silver for the pennies came from various sources, including mines in Germany and increasingly from older coins melted down and restruck with new designs. Every few years, the king would order a recoinage, requiring all old pennies to be exchanged for new ones, a process that allowed the royal treasury to collect fees and ensured that worn or clipped coins were removed from circulation. Across the English Channel, the Frankish kingdoms that emerged from Charlemagne's empire developed their own silver currencies. Charlemagne himself had reformed the monetary system, establishing a pound of silver as the basis for accounting, which was divided into 20 shillings, each containing 12 pennies. This system of pounds, shillings, and pence would persist in Britain for over 1,000 years. Though the actual coins minted were primarily pennies, merchants and scribes kept their accounts using this broader system, demonstrating how money existed both as physical objects and as abstract units of calculation. In the Italian peninsula, a different monetary culture flourished. The coastal cities of Venice, Genoa, and later Florence grew wealthy on Mediterranean trade, and their currencies reflected this commercial sophistication. Venice introduced the silver grosso, a coin larger than the penny, which proved invaluable for the substantial transactions involved in maritime commerce. Later, in 1252, both Florence and Genoa began minting gold coins once again, the first significant gold coinage in Western Europe since Roman times. The Florentine florin, marked with the city's lily emblem, and the Genoese genovino became trusted currencies throughout the Mediterranean world and beyond. These Italian city-states were also pioneering new ways of handling money beyond the coins themselves. Merchants traveling with large quantities of gold or silver faced considerable risks from bandits and pirates. In response, Italian bankers developed increasingly sophisticated methods of transferring value without physically moving coins. A merchant in Florence could deposit money with a banking house and receive documentation that would allow him to withdraw equivalent funds from a branch or partner bank in distant Bruges or London. This system of banking relationships stretched across Europe, following the trade routes and creating invisible networks of credit and trust. The role of monasteries in medieval monetary life deserves particular attention. Monasteries were among the few institutions that combined literacy, numerical skills, and a degree of permanence in an often unstable world. They served as safe depositories where nobles and merchants could store valuables. Monastic scribes kept meticulous records of debts and credits, and some monasteries effectively functioned as banks for their regions. The Templars, a religious military order, developed an especially sophisticated system. A pilgrim traveling to the Holy Land could deposit money at a Templar house in Paris and receive an encoded letter. Upon reaching Jerusalem, he could present this letter at another Templar establishment and withdraw his funds, minus a fee. This system protected travelers while generating income for the order. The medieval period also saw constant tension between the intrinsic value of coins and their nominal value. Kings and princes faced perpetual financial pressures, maintaining armies, building fortifications, and conducting the business of government. When their treasuries ran low, the temptation to debase the currency proved difficult to resist. By reducing the silver or gold content while maintaining the same face value, a ruler could effectively mint more coins from the same amount of precious metal. However, merchants and money changers quickly detected such debasement, leading to inflation and loss of confidence in the currency. Some territories became notorious for their debased coins, while others guarded their reputation for monetary integrity as a valuable asset in itself. The varying currencies across medieval Europe created opportunities for money changers who became familiar figures at fairs and markets. With their tables set up in prominent locations, they would exchange coins from different regions and kingdoms. applying their knowledge of relative values and current exchange rates. The diversity of currencies meant that a merchant traveling from Barcelona to Antwerp might see his money exchanged multiple times along the journey, with each transaction involving careful weighing and assessment of the coin's true metal content. As medieval Europe moved toward its later centuries, the increasing sophistication of commerce demanded increasingly sophisticated monetary instruments. The coins of Byzantium, England, France, and the Italian cities were not merely metal discs. They were embodiments of political authority, facilitators of trade, and measures of value in an expanding economic world. The foundations laid in these centuries, the banking practices, the concepts of monetary stability, and the infrastructure of exchange would prove essential as Europe stood on the threshold of even greater transformations in how humanity understood and used money. As paper began to enter the story of currency in distant China, Europe's medieval monetary systems continued to evolve, setting the stage for the revolutionary changes that lay ahead. As medieval European merchants conducted their trade with heavy pouches of silver pennies and gold florins, something remarkable was happening thousands of miles away in China. There, during the flourishing Tang dynasty, an innovation was taking shape that would eventually transform the very nature of money itself. Paper money, perhaps one of humanity's most ingenious and counterintuitive inventions, was about to enter the world. The story begins not with government decree or imperial command, but with a practical problem faced by merchants in the bustling commercial centers of Tang China. Picture these traders, moving goods along the empire's extensive network of roads and waterways. They dealt in porcelain, silk, tea, and countless other commodities. The coins they used, typically bronze pieces with distinctive square holes in their centers, were reliable and widely accepted. But they had one significant drawback: they were remarkably heavy. A merchant carrying enough coins to purchase a substantial shipment of goods might need to transport hundreds of pounds of bronze. This weight wasn't merely inconvenient, it was dangerous. Roads could be treacherous, and thieves knew that merchants carrying large quantities of coins made tempting targets. The very weight that gave coins their trustworthy solidity became a burden that limited commerce. The solution emerged gradually, organically, from the merchant community itself. Wealthy traders and money dealers began offering a service. A merchant could deposit coins with them and receive a written receipt in return. This receipt, inscribed on paper, a material the Chinese had been producing for centuries, documented how much money had been left on deposit. When the merchant reached his destination, he could present this receipt to another branch of the same money dealing operation and withdraw coins there. These early receipts, called flying money because they seemed to transport value through the air, represented a conceptual leap. The paper itself had virtually no intrinsic value, yet it could be exchanged for actual coins, making it functionally equivalent to money. During the 9th century, this system operated primarily as a private convenience among merchants, without official government involvement. The transition from private receipts to true government-issued paper money unfolded during the Song dynasty, which began in 960. The Song period witnessed extraordinary economic growth and urbanization. cities swelled with craftspeople, traders, and laborers. Markets hummed with activity. Iron production reached levels that wouldn't be seen in Europe for centuries. The sheer volume of commercial transactions strained the existing monetary system. In the province of Sichuan, local merchants created a form of paper currency called jiaozi, initially as promissory notes, backed by groups of wealthy traders. These notes circulated among people who trusted the issuing merchants to redeem them for coins upon demand. The government, recognizing both the usefulness of this innovation and the potential dangers of unregulated private money, gradually assumed control of the system. By 1024, the Song government established an official bureau to oversee the printing and issuing of jiaozi. This marked the first time in human history that a government produced paper currency as a deliberate monetary policy. The notes were printed on special paper using intricate designs that made counterfeiting difficult. Multiple colors, elaborate seals, and sometimes even mixtures of fibers that gave the paper a distinctive feel, all served as security features. The advantages of paper money were immediately apparent. A merchant could carry enormous sums without physical burden. Transactions could happen more quickly, without the need to count out numerous coins. The government could more easily transport funds to distant regions of the empire. Paper notes could be produced in various denominations, making it easy to conduct both small, everyday purchases and large commercial transactions. Yet paper money also introduced challenges that metallic coins had never posed. With coins made of bronze, silver, or gold, the material itself held value. People might question whether a coin was genuine or debased, but the metal always had some worth. Paper, by contrast, was valuable only because people believed it could be exchanged for something else. This required trust in the issuing authority and confidence in the system itself. The Song government learned these lessons as it experimented with paper currency. They discovered that printing too much money created problems. When paper notes flooded the market without corresponding increases in goods and services, prices began to rise. The paper became less valuable in real terms, even though its face value remained the same. This phenomenon, which we now call inflation, became particularly acute during times of military conflict, when governments were tempted to print money to pay armies rather than raising funds through taxation. Subsequent Chinese dynasties continued using paper money with varying degrees of success. The Jin dynasty, which ruled northern China during the 12th and 13th centuries, issued its own paper currency. The Mongol Yuan dynasty, established by Kublai Khan in the 13th century, made extensive use of paper money throughout its vast empire. It was during this Yuan period that paper money made its most famous impression on a Western observer. The Venetian merchant Marco Polo, traveling through China in the late 13th century, witnessed the paper money system in operation and found it absolutely astonishing. In his accounts, he described with wonder how the great Khan could produce money from mulberry bark, how all people throughout the empire accepted these notes in payment, and how anyone caught refusing them faced severe penalties. To Polo, accustomed to the heavy silver and gold coins of Europe, the idea that decorated paper could function as money seemed almost like alchemy. Yet despite Marco Polo's detailed descriptions, Europeans didn't rush to adopt the innovation. The concept seemed too strange, too divorced from their understanding of what money should be. They would continue using metallic coins exclusively for centuries to come, while in China, the paper money experiment continued its complex evolution. The Ming Dynasty, which came to power in 1368, initially continued the paper currency system, but eventually encountered severe problems with over-issuing and declining public confidence. By the mid-15th century, China had largely returned to using silver and copper coins for everyday transactions, though the memory and knowledge of paper money remained. The invention had proven that money need not be heavy metal. It could be light, portable, and convenient. But it had also demonstrated that this convenience came with risks and required careful management. These lessons, learned over centuries in China, would eventually need to be relearned by every society that adopted paper currency. The merchants of medieval Europe, still counting out their silver coins, could hardly imagine that the future would prove Marco Polo's seemingly fantastic tales to be not only true, but prophetic of what was to come. The paper money that had flourished in China for centuries remained largely unknown to the Western world as European sailors prepared their ships for journeys into uncharted waters. While the Chinese had mastered the art of printing currency on mulberry bark paper, Europeans were still conducting their commerce primarily with heavy metal coins. But the world was about to change in ways no one could have anticipated, and at the heart of this transformation would be gold and silver in quantities beyond imagination. When Christopher Columbus sailed westward in 1492, he carried with him not only the ambitions of the Spanish crown, but also a profound belief that he would find new sources of precious metals. The European economies of the late 15th century were experiencing what historians sometimes call a bullion famine. Gold and silver were flowing eastward to pay for spices, silk, and other luxury goods from Asia, while European mines produced relatively modest amounts of these precious metals. The shortage made it difficult to mint enough coins for growing commerce, and merchants struggled with the practical challenges of conducting business without adequate currency. The arrival of Europeans in the Americas opened floodgates that would fundamentally alter the global economy. In the mountains of what is now Bolivia, Spanish conquistadors discovered Potosi, a peak so rich in silver that it would produce more of the precious metal than anywhere else on Earth. The mountain's veins of silver ore seemed almost inexhaustible, and by the mid-16th century, Potosi had become one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the world, rivaling London and Paris in population. The silver extracted from Potosi and other New World mines flowed across the Atlantic in Spanish treasure fleets. These convoys of galleons, heavily armed against pirates and rival nations, carried tons of precious metal to Spain. The Spanish crown claimed a fifth of all silver mined, a royal share that filled the treasury in Seville. From there, this wealth radiated outward through the European economy, paying for Spanish armies, purchasing goods from other nations, and gradually increasing the money supply throughout the continent. In Mexico, the Spanish discovered more silver deposits, and they also found deposits of gold, though in smaller quantities than the legendary mountains of silver in South America. The scale of extraction was staggering. In just over a century, more silver entered the European economy than had circulated in the previous 1,000 years. This immense influx of precious metal had profound and unexpected consequences. As silver became more abundant, its value relative to goods began to change. prices across Europe started to rise in what became known as the price revolution. A loaf of bread that might have cost a certain number of silver coins in 1500 would cost significantly more by 1600. This inflation occurred gradually, almost imperceptibly to individuals, but over decades it transformed the economic landscape. People living on fixed incomes found their wealth diminishing, while those who could adjust their prices or wages found themselves navigating a changing world. The abundance of precious metals made possible a standardization of currency that had been difficult to achieve before. Mints across Europe produced coins in more regular weights and purities. In 1566, a new Spanish coin called the Real de a Ocho, or Piece of Eight, became one of the world's first truly global currencies. These large silver coins, containing approximately 1 ounce of silver, were accepted from Europe to Asia to the Americas. Merchants could conduct business across vast distances with confidence that these coins would be recognized and valued wherever ships could sail. The standardization of currency required sophisticated minting operations. The Spanish established mints in their American colonies, including in Mexico City and Potosi itself, stamping coins where the silver was extracted rather than transporting raw metal across the ocean. Each mint had its own mark, and skilled craftsmen worked to ensure consistent weight and purity. The coins bore the symbols of the Spanish monarchy, and these images traveled to the furthest reaches of global trade, becoming recognizable from Manila to Amsterdam. With standardization came the need for exchange rates between different currencies. As trade expanded, merchants needed to know how many English pounds equaled a Spanish piece of 8, or how many Venetian ducats could be exchanged for Dutch guilders. Money changers became essential figures in port cities, their tables laden with coins from dozens of nations, their ledgers recording the constantly shifting relative values of different currencies. The complexity of international commerce was growing, and with it grew the sophistication of those who facilitated the flow of money across borders. The flood of precious metals from the Americas also flowed westward across the Pacific. Spanish galleons sailed from Acapulco to Manila, carrying silver to trade for Chinese silk, porcelain, and other goods. The Chinese economy, vast and productive, had an seemingly infinite appetite for silver, which they used in their monetary system. This trans-Pacific trade route moved such quantities of silver that some historians estimate nearly half of all American silver eventually ended up in China, linking the economies of continents separated by the world's largest ocean. The global movement of gold and silver in this age of exploration represented something new in human history. For the first time, precious metals mined on one continent could be transformed into coins, shipped across oceans, and used to purchase goods that would be carried to yet another continent. Money was becoming truly international, and the exchange rates between different currencies were creating the foundations of a global economy. Yet this system depended entirely on the physical movement of heavy metal across dangerous seas. Ships laden with treasure attracted pirates and privateers. Storms sent fortunes to the ocean floor. The journey from the mines of Potosi to the markets of Europe or Asia was long, expensive, and risky. Even as this system of precious metal currency reached its zenith, the seeds were being planted for new forms of money that would not require ships full of heavy coins to cross the world's oceans. The banking families of Europe were developing innovations that would, in time, transform how money moved through the global economy. As the great age of exploration brought unprecedented wealth flowing into European ports, the world of commerce grew so complex that traditional methods of handling money could no longer keep pace. Into this bustling, transforming landscape stepped remarkable families who would reshape the very foundations of finance, creating institutions and practices that would echo through the centuries to come. Picture the narrow streets of Florence in the early 15th century, where the sound of hammers on metal rang from workshops, and merchants gathered in covered markets to conduct their business. Among these industrious citizens, one family began to distinguish itself, not through manufacture or trade in goods, but through the careful management of money itself. The Medici family started modestly, as so many banking dynasties did, but they possessed something that would prove more valuable than gold: an understanding of how money could work across distances and through time. The genius of families like the Medici lay in recognizing that physical coins were increasingly inconvenient for the merchants and nobles conducting business across Europe and beyond. A trader in London who needed to pay for silk from Florence, or a pilgrim traveling to Rome, faced a dangerous journey if carrying enough gold or silver for their needs. The banking families offered an elegant solution. They established branches in multiple cities, creating networks that spanned the known world. A merchant could deposit coins with a Medici bank in one city and receive a letter of credit, a simple document written on parchment, which could be presented at another Medici branch hundreds of miles away to receive payment. The money itself never made the perilous journey. Only information traveled, carried by trusted couriers. These letters of credit represented a profound evolution in the concept of money. They were not coins, not commodities, but promises backed by reputation and trust. The Medici name itself became a form of currency, as reliable as silver and far more convenient to transport. Their success rested on meticulous record keeping, with ledgers tracking every transaction, every deposit, every transfer across their network. Double-entry bookkeeping, refined in the Italian city-states, allowed these bankers to maintain accurate accounts of complex transactions, ensuring that the numbers balanced across continents. North of the Alps, in the German city of Augsburg, another family rose to prominence through similar innovations. The Fugger family began in the textile trade, but Jakob Fugger, known to history as Jacob the Rich, transformed the family business into a banking empire that would finance emperors and shape European politics. The Fuggers understood something fundamental about the relationship between money and power. Kings and princes, despite their authority and lands, were perpetually in need of ready money to pay armies, build fortifications, and maintain their courts. The Fugger banks could provide this liquidity, but at a price. When a monarch needed funds, the Fuggers would advance the money, taking as security the rights to mineral wealth, tax revenues, or trade monopolies. Jakob Fugger became so essential to the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V that it was said the emperor himself was in debt to his banker. This represented a subtle but significant shift in the nature of power. Money, and those who controlled its flow, could influence the affairs of nations. The banking families did not rule through armies or noble birth. but through the careful management of credit and debt. These banking dynasties also pioneered the concept of interest in a form that could navigate the religious sensitivities of the age. The Christian Church had long condemned usury, the charging of interest on loans. Yet commerce required some compensation for those who provided capital. The banking families developed sophisticated methods of building their profit into exchange rates and fees, creating returns on their investments while maintaining the appearance of propriety. They charged for the service of transferring money, for the expertise of managing accounts, for the risk they undertook in extending credit. In this way, they established that money itself could generate more money through its productive use in commerce and enterprise. The rise of these banking families also meant the creation of lasting institutions. Unlike individual moneylenders or temporary partnerships, families like the Medici and Fugas built organizations designed to persist across generations. They trained apprentices, established procedures, created branches that could operate with a degree of independence while maintaining standards set by the Home Office. They invented many of the practices we now take for granted in modern banking: the maintenance of accounts for depositors, the provision of credit based on assessment of risk, the transfer of funds across distances, and the exchange of currencies at established rates. These institutions became gathering places for commercial information. A Medici banker in Venice would learn of ships arriving from the east, of harvests failing in distant regions, of political changes that might affect trade routes. This information flowed through the banking networks, making the great banking families not just handlers of money, but essential nodes in the communication systems of their age. Merchants came to depend on their bankers, not only for financial services, but for intelligence about market conditions across Europe and beyond. The relationship between these banking families and the arts, scholarship, and culture of their times created an environment where wealth could be transformed into lasting achievements. The Medici, most famously, became patrons of artists and thinkers whose works would define the Renaissance. Their banking profits funded workshops where painters, sculptors, and architects created beauty that still moves us centuries later. This patronage was not merely charitable. It enhanced the family's prestige and demonstrated the civilizing power of well-managed wealth. As these banking practices matured, they began to resemble the foundations of our modern financial system. The notion that money could be safely deposited with an institution, that accounts could be maintained over time, that transfers could be made through written instructions rather than physical coins, that credit could be extended based on reputation and assessed risk. All these concepts emerged from the practices of families like the Medici and Fugas. They showed that banking could be more than simple money changing or lending. It could be a sophisticated service essential to the functioning of complex economies. The legacy of these banking families extended far beyond their own considerable fortunes. They demonstrated that financial institutions could bridge distances, smooth the flow of commerce, and make possible transactions that would have been impractical with coins alone. As their practices spread and were adopted by others, the infrastructure of modern finance began to take shape, setting the stage for even more ambitious monetary innovations that would follow in the centuries ahead. As the banking families of Europe demonstrated the power of private financial institutions to facilitate commerce across borders and between kingdoms. A new challenge emerged that would reshape the relationship between money and state power. Governments found themselves increasingly dependent on these private bankers to fund their expenditures, wage their wars, and manage their debts. Yet the bankers answered to no sovereign, pursued their own interests, and could withdraw their support whenever they chose. This uncomfortable arrangement prompted a revolutionary idea. What if nations created their own banks, institutions that would serve the state's interests while bringing order and stability to the chaotic world of money? The story of central banking begins in a quiet corner of Northern Europe, in the Kingdom of Sweden, during the middle of the 17th century. Stockholm had become a bustling center of commerce, and its merchants dealt with an unusual form of money. Swedish copper coins, based on the value of that abundant metal, had grown enormous. A single coin might weigh several pounds, and conducting any substantial transaction required transporting heavy plates of copper in carts through the city streets. Into this unwieldy situation stepped a banker named Johann Palmstruch, who established the Stockholm Banco in 1656. His institution accepted these cumbersome copper plates as deposits and issued paper receipts in return. Receipts that could be used for payment and were far easier to carry than the metal itself. The convenience of these paper notes proved so popular that Palmstruch began issuing more receipts than he held copper to back them, a practice that would become familiar in later banking history. When depositors eventually rushed to reclaim their copper simultaneously, the bank could not fulfill its promises, and Palmstruch found himself imprisoned. Yet from this failure, something important emerged. The Swedish government recognized both the utility of a reliable paper currency and the danger of leaving its issuance to private hands. In 1668, they established the Riksständer's Bank, which would later become known simply as the Riksbank. This institution, owned by the Swedish Parliament rather than private individuals, became the world's first true central bank, though it would take time for its full role to develop. Across the North Sea, England faced its own monetary challenges in the final decade of the 17th century. The nation had just emerged from a period of political upheaval, having replaced King James II with William of Orange in what historians call the Glorious Revolution. The new government needed to fund a war against France, but the royal treasury's credit had deteriorated after years of mismanagement and broken promises. Previous monarchs had seized loans and refused to repay them, making merchants and wealthy individuals reluctant to lend more money regardless of the interest offered. A Scottish merchant and financial innovator named William Paterson proposed an ingenious solution. He suggested creating a bank that would lend the government £1,200,000, an enormous sum for that time, in exchange for special privileges. This bank would receive interest on the loan and would be granted the right to issue paper banknotes backed by that government debt. Shareholders would invest in the bank, effectively lending their money to the government while receiving shares in a profitable enterprise. The plan aligned private interest with public need in a way that had never been attempted on such a scale. In 1694, the Bank of England received its charter and began operations in the Mercer's Hall in London. The subscription books opened to investors, and such was the enthusiasm that the required capital was raised within just 12 days. Merchants, nobles, and even ordinary citizens purchased shares, seeing an opportunity to profit while supporting their nation. The bank made its loan to the government and began issuing notes that circulated as currency. These notes carried the promise that they could be exchanged for gold or silver at the bank's offices, a guarantee that helped people trust them as genuine money. The Bank of England did not immediately become the only source of banknotes in the realm. Private banks continued to issue their own notes, and competition flourished in England's financial markets. Yet the Bank of England held advantages that other institutions could not match. Its close relationship with the government provided stability, and its size allowed it to weather financial storms that destroyed smaller banks. Over the decades, it gradually assumed responsibilities that we now associate with central banking, though these roles emerged through practice rather than original design. When other banks faced runs of panicked depositors demanding their money, the Bank of England could provide emergency loans to prevent collapse. When the government needed to borrow more funds, the bank could facilitate those loans by managing the issuance of bonds and coordinating with other financial institutions. When questions arose about the soundness of various banknotes circulating through the economy, the Bank of England's notes became the trusted standard against which others were measured. The bank's officials learned that their decisions about how much credit to extend and how many notes to issue could influence the entire economy's health, encouraging commerce and growth, or, conversely, constraining activity through caution. Other nations watched these experiments with great interest. The pattern established by Sweden and refined by England suggested a template for bringing order to monetary affairs. The Bank of France emerged in 1800 during Napoleon's rule, intended to stabilize French finances after the chaos of revolution and the disaster of earlier paper money schemes. Spain, Prussia, and other European powers followed with their own national banks, each adapting the concept to their particular circumstances and needs. These early central banks did not possess all the powers their modern successors would wield. They could not compel private banks to follow their directives. And in many countries, they competed with private note-issuing banks for decades. Their founders would have been surprised by how much authority these institutions would eventually accumulate. Yet even in their early form, central banks represented a fundamental shift in how societies organized their monetary systems. Money was becoming less a private arrangement between individuals and more a matter of state policy and public management. The relationship between government and central bank varied from nation to nation, creating different models that persist to this day. Some banks remain closely controlled by their governments, essentially functioning as departments of state. Others maintained greater independence, with private shareholders influencing their decisions alongside public officials. These arrangements reflected ongoing debates about who should control the money supply and for whose benefit such power should be exercised. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the concept of central banking had established itself as an essential feature of modern national economies. These institutions stood at the intersection of public authority and private commerce, managing the delicate balance between providing enough money to facilitate trade and avoiding so much that its value deteriorated. The story of money had entered a new phase, one in which specialized institutions bore responsibility for maintaining trust in the currencies that increasingly flowed through society as paper promises rather than metal coins. And as paper money prepared to spread more widely through the Western world, these central banks would play crucial roles in determining whether such experiments succeeded or failed, guiding their nations through prosperity and crisis in the transformative centuries ahead. As the great central banks of Europe established their authority over national currencies, a quiet revolution was beginning to unfold in the counting houses and treasuries across the Western world. The concept of paper money, which had flourished and sometimes faltered in distant China centuries before, was now making its way into the hands of European merchants, colonists, and common citizens. The journey from metal coins to paper notes would prove neither straightforward nor swift, marked by both triumphant successes and cautionary tales that would echo through the halls of finance for generations. The transition began gradually, almost imperceptibly, in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. Banks that had once merely safeguarded deposits of gold and silver coins discovered that their receipts for these deposits had begun circulating as currency themselves. It made practical sense after all. Why carry heavy bags of metal across muddy streets or treacherous roads when a simple piece of paper could represent that same value? These early banknotes were essentially promises, written agreements that the bearer could return to the bank at any time and exchange the paper for actual coins. In England, goldsmiths had long provided secure storage for wealthy individuals' precious metals. Their handwritten receipts became increasingly standardized, and merchants began accepting these notes in trade, knowing they could redeem them for gold whenever they wished. The Bank of England, established in the previous chapter's era, began issuing its own notes with greater sophistication and security. These pieces of paper bore elaborate engravings, watermarks, and the weight of institutional authority. Yet still, many remained skeptical. Paper could be copied, forged, destroyed by fire or water. How could it truly replace the solid reality of a gold coin in one's palm? Across the English Channel, France would provide one of history's most dramatic examples of paper money's potential perils. In the early 18th century, a Scottish financier named John Law arrived in France with ambitious ideas about banking and currency. The French government, burdened by enormous debts from the wars of Louis XIV, proved receptive to his innovative proposals. Law established the Banque Générale in 1716, which issued paper notes backed by gold and silver. The system initially worked remarkably well, and confidence in these notes grew steadily. Encouraged by this success, Law's vision expanded dramatically. He connected his bank to a trading company with exclusive rights to develop French Louisiana and other colonial territories. The scheme became known as the Mississippi Company, and Law convinced the French public that unimaginable wealth awaited in these distant lands. Paper money flowed freely, printed to finance these grand ventures. Share prices in the company soared to dizzying heights as speculation gripped Paris. People from all walks of life invested their savings, believing they had discovered a path to certain riches. But the wealth in Louisiana existed more in imagination than reality. When investors eventually sought to convert their paper notes and shares back into tangible metal, the system could not bear the strain. The bubble burst in 1720 with spectacular force, wiping out fortunes and shaking public confidence in paper currency for decades. The episode became known as the Mississippi Bubble and its lessons were studied carefully by financial authorities throughout Europe. Paper money, it seemed, required more than just printing presses and optimism. It demanded careful management, realistic backing, and above all, public trust. Despite this cautionary tale, the practical advantages of paper currency proved too compelling to abandon entirely. In the American colonies, various experiments with paper money unfolded throughout the 18th century. Massachusetts issued paper notes as early as 1690 to help pay for military expeditions. Other colonies followed, each creating their own paper currencies of varying reliability. Some maintained their value reasonably well, while others depreciated rapidly as colonial governments printed more notes than their economies could absorb. The experience of the Continental Congress during the American Revolution provided another dramatic lesson. Faced with the enormous expense of fighting a war without the ability to levy effective taxes, the revolutionary government printed continental dollars in vast quantities. The phrase, "not worth a continental," entered common speech as these notes became nearly worthless, undermined by both overprinting and British counterfeiting efforts designed to destabilize the rebel economy. Yet through these trials and errors, the practical knowledge of managing paper currency slowly accumulated. Sweden's Riksbank continued issuing notes with greater sophistication. The Bank of England's notes circulated ever more widely, accepted not just in London, but throughout the British Empire. These successful implementations shared common features. They were issued by stable, trustworthy institutions. They remained convertible to metal on demand, and crucially, the issuing authorities exercised restraint in how many notes they created. The mechanics of this system revealed themselves through everyday use. A merchant in Bristol might deposit £100 in gold coins at a local bank and receive paper notes in return. These notes could then travel to Edinburgh or Liverpool in a leather purse, much lighter and easier to transport than the metal they represented. If questions arose about a note's authenticity or value, it could be presented at any branch of the issuing bank for redemption. This network of trust and verification gradually expanded, creating an infrastructure that made paper money functional across increasingly large territories. The appearance of these early banknotes reflected both artistic craftsmanship and practical security concerns. Engravers created intricate designs that would be difficult to replicate with the technology available to potential counterfeiters. Elaborate scrollwork, fine lettering, and detailed imagery of classical figures or national symbols adorned the notes. Special papers with particular textures or embedded threads added further protection. Each note was also individually numbered and signed by bank officials, adding another layer of verification and accountability. As the 19th century approached, paper money had established itself as a permanent fixture in the Western financial landscape, though it coexisted with metal coins rather than replacing them entirely. Small transactions still relied on copper and silver coins, while larger commercial dealings increasingly utilized paper notes. The gold sovereigns and silver crowns remained in circulation, providing the tangible foundation upon which paper money's credibility rested. The gradual acceptance of paper currency represented a profound shift in human psychology as much as in economic practice. People were learning to place faith in symbols and promises, rather than only in physical objects with intrinsic value. This transformation required building institutions worthy of that faith and developing systems to maintain it. The journey from the Tang dynasty's flying money to the banknotes circulating in Georgian London had taken centuries, crossing continents and cultures, learning from both successes and failures along the way. The paper in people's pockets and purses was becoming as real as any gold coin, backed not by the weight of metal, but by the strength of the systems and societies that issued it. As paper money gradually gained acceptance across Europe and the Americas, a new challenge emerged for the growing community of trading nations. Without some common measure of value, international commerce remained complicated and uncertain. A British merchant selling wool to a French buyer needed to know exactly how many French francs equaled a pound sterling. An American importer purchasing tea from China had to calculate exchanges between dollars, Spanish pieces of 8, and Chinese silver taels. Each transaction required negotiation, and the values fluctuated wildly based on the reputation of various governments and the actual metal content in their coins. The solution that emerged during the 19th century seemed almost elegantly simple. Nations began linking their currencies to gold, that ancient and universally desired metal that had fascinated humanity since the earliest civilizations. If every country agreed that their currency could be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold, then all currencies would automatically have stable exchange rates with each other. A pound sterling might equal 1/4 ounce of gold, while $5 American might equal that same amount. Mathematics would do the rest. Great Britain led the way into this new monetary era. Though not entirely by design, the nation had been using both gold and silver coins for centuries, with the values of each metal fluctuating against the other. After the Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815, Parliament made a decisive choice to define the pound sterling exclusively in terms of gold. The Royal Mint would exchange paper Bank of England notes for gold sovereigns at a fixed rate, and anyone holding gold could have it coined into sovereigns for a small fee. This commitment transformed the pound into a currency as dependable as the precious metal itself. The advantages became apparent to merchants and bankers throughout Europe. When dealing with British traders, there was never any question about the value being offered. A pound note represented a precise amount of gold, stored safely in the vaults of the Bank of England. This reliability made London an attractive place to do business, and gradually other nations began to follow Britain's example. Germany unified its various states and their separate currencies in 1871, establishing the gold mark as the new nation's standard currency. The Latin Monetary Union, formed by France, Belgium, Italy, Switzerland, and later joined by other European countries, coordinated their gold coinage to facilitate easier exchange. By the 1870s, the United States, which had experimented with various monetary arrangements during and after its Civil War, committed firmly to the gold standard. Even nations in Asia and Latin America, eager to participate in expanding international trade, began anchoring their currencies to gold. The system operated with an almost mechanical precision. Each country's central bank or treasury held reserves of gold bullion. Paper money and coins circulated among the population, but these were understood to be representatives of actual gold, available for redemption. If a British investor purchased bonds in Argentina, payment could be made in pounds, which the Argentine recipient could theoretically exchange for gold, then convert to Argentine pesos at the official gold price. The gold itself rarely needed to move. Instead, banks simply adjusted their ledgers, transferring ownership of gold sitting securely in underground vaults. This international gold standard created a discipline that constrained government behavior in ways that seemed beneficial to the functioning of global commerce. If a nation printed too much paper money relative to its gold reserves, people would begin demanding gold in exchange for the increasingly abundant notes. As gold flowed out of the country to foreign holders of its currency, the government would be forced to reduce the money supply, raising interest rates and slowing its economy until equilibrium returned. The system thus imposed a kind of automatic correction mechanism that prevented wild inflation or prolonged monetary mischief. International trade flourished under these stable conditions. Merchants in Manchester could confidently contract to purchase cotton from India, knowing the rupee's value relative to the pound would remain constant. French investors could fund railway construction in Russia without fear that ruble devaluation would destroy their returns. The decades before the First World War became a golden age of globalization, with goods, capital, and people moving across borders with an ease that would not be seen again for many years. Yet the gold standard also imposed costs that were not immediately apparent during the prosperous years. Because the money supply was tied to gold reserves, governments found their hands bound when economic troubles arose. During times of recession, when more money in circulation might have helped revive commerce and reduce unemployment, the commitment to maintain gold convertibility prevented central banks from expanding credit. If crops failed or banks collapsed, the rigid requirements of the gold standard sometimes intensified suffering rather than alleviating it. The system also created curious imbalances between nations. Countries that produced gold from mines, like South Africa, Australia, and parts of the United States, enjoyed a natural advantage as fresh metal flowed into their monetary systems. Nations without gold deposits had to earn the metal through trade surpluses or borrow it from abroad. This sometimes led to intense competition for gold reserves, with countries implementing policies designed to attract the precious metal at their neighbors' expense. For ordinary people living through this era, the gold standard remained largely invisible in daily life. Workers received wages in paper money or coins. Shopkeepers accepted these for purchases, and most people never actually handled gold or thought about the metal backing their currency. The system operated quietly in the background, maintained by central bankers and treasury officials who carefully managed reserves and monitored the ratios between paper money and gold stocks. Yet in the vaults beneath great financial institutions, the gold bars rested in orderly stacks, their weight and purity precisely recorded. The Bank of England's gold reserves, the German Reichsbank's bullion, the gold certificates in the United States Treasury. These represented not just wealth, but confidence. They were tangible proof that currencies had real value, that promises would be kept, that the complex machinery of international finance rested on something solid and ancient and universally recognized. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the gold standard seemed to many observers like a permanent achievement of civilization, a rational solution to the age-old problem of monetary uncertainty. The system had brought stability and prosperity to much of the world. Few could imagine that within a few short years, the terrible pressures of global conflict would shatter this carefully constructed order, forcing nations to make difficult choices between gold and other pressing needs. As the golden age of the gold standard reached its zenith In the late 19th century, the world of banking was undergoing its own quiet revolution. While nations concerned themselves with fixing their currencies to precious metal, the institutions that handled money day by day were transforming into something recognizably modern. The banks that had once been austere counting houses, serving only merchants and the wealthy, were gradually opening their doors wider, developing new services that would fundamentally change how ordinary people interacted with money. Picture a bank in the 1870s. Its interior would likely feature dark wood paneling, brass fixtures polished to a warm glow, and clerks perched on high stools, laboriously recording transactions in enormous, leather-bound ledgers. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer required careful notation by hand. The work was painstaking and slow, yet it represented something revolutionary. People were beginning to trust these institutions, not just for borrowing money or exchanging currencies, but for keeping their funds safe and accessible. The checking account, though its origins stretched back further, truly came into its own during this era. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than carrying gold coins or paper currency everywhere, a person could deposit their money with a bank and write instructions on special slips of paper, directing the bank to pay specified amounts to other parties. These checks could be sent through the mail, handed over in business transactions, or used to pay for goods and services without the risk of carrying large sums of physical money. In the United States, the use of checks expanded dramatically after the Civil War. Businesses found them particularly useful for managing accounts and making payments across distances. A merchant in New York could pay a supplier in Chicago without shipping actual currency across the country. The check would travel by post, be presented at the supplier's bank, and the banks would settle accounts between themselves through their own networks. This system required trust, coordination, and meticulous record keeping, but it made commerce flow more smoothly than ever before. Savings accounts represented another innovation that brought banking to ordinary citizens. Previously, if a working family managed to set aside a small amount of money, they might hide it under a mattress or in a jar. These savings earned nothing and risked being lost to theft or fire. Banks began offering accounts specifically designed for small savers, accepting modest deposits and paying interest on the accumulated funds. This served both parties well. The banks gained access to capital they could loan out to borrowers, while savers saw their money grow slowly over time and knew it was protected in a secure vault. In Britain, the trustee savings banks movement had been providing these services since early in the century, specifically aiming to encourage thrift among working people. Similar institutions appeared across Europe and North America. The postal savings system, which allowed people to deposit money at post offices that would then be managed by postal banks, became popular in many countries. These systems recognized that financial services need not be exclusive to the prosperous. The expansion of credit was perhaps the most significant development of this era. Banks had always made loans, of course, but typically only to merchants, landowners, or established businesses with substantial collateral. As banking became more sophisticated and competitive, institutions began extending credit to a broader range of borrowers. A shopkeeper could obtain a loan to purchase inventory. A farmer might borrow against the next harvest. Even some urban workers could access small loans in times of need. This expansion of credit served as fuel for economic growth. When a business could borrow to invest in new equipment or expand operations, it could grow faster than if it had to wait to accumulate profits. The money deposited by savers was transformed through banking into capital that built factories, financed trade, and created employment. The system worked as a kind of economic alchemy, turning idle savings into productive investment. The telegraph transformed banking as profoundly as any policy or practice. Before its widespread adoption, financial information moved at the speed of horses, ships, and trains. A bank in San Francisco conducting business with one in New York might wait weeks for confirmation of transactions or current account balances. The telegraph reduced this to minutes. By the 1880s, major banks in financial centers were connected by an invisible web of wires, sending coded messages about transfers, exchange rates, and account statuses throughout each business day. This speed enabled new possibilities. A businessman traveling far from home could arrange for his bank to telegraph funds to a bank in a distant city where he could access them almost immediately. International transactions became more practical and reliable. Banks could verify the creditworthiness of potential borrowers by contacting other institutions that had dealt with them. Information that once took weeks to gather could be assembled in hours. The physical infrastructure of banking expanded to match these new capabilities. Banks opened branch offices in smaller towns and new neighborhoods, making their services accessible to more people. Grand bank buildings rose in major cities, their imposing architecture designed to convey stability and permanence. The massive vaults, intricate locks, and thick walls reassured depositors that their money would be safe. These buildings were temples to the new faith in financial institutions. Safety deposit boxes became a standard service, allowing customers to store valuable documents, jewelry, or other precious items in secure compartments within the bank's vault. This simple offering acknowledged that security was one of the fundamental services banks provided. In an era when private homes were vulnerable to fire and theft, knowing that important items rested behind steel and stone provided genuine peace of mind. The clearinghouse emerged as an elegant solution to a growing problem. As the number of checks being written multiplied, banks found themselves drowning in paper, needing to collect payment from dozens or hundreds of other institutions for checks deposited by their customers. Clearing houses served as central meeting places where representatives from multiple banks would gather daily to exchange checks and settle the net balances owed between institutions. Rather than each bank collecting individually from every other bank, they could make a single settlement payment through the clearinghouse. This system, which began in London and spread to financial centers worldwide, made the whole mechanism of checking accounts practical at scale. Banking was also becoming more specialized. Some institutions focused primarily on commercial lending to businesses. Others concentrated on accepting deposits and serving retail customers. Investment banks emerged as distinct entities that helped corporations raise capital by issuing stocks and bonds. Mortgage banks specialized in loans secured by real estate. This specialization allowed institutions to develop expertise in particular types of financial services and serve their chosen markets more effectively. As banking grew more complex and important to economic life, the need for regulation and oversight became apparent. Bank failures could devastate communities, wiping out the savings of families and businesses. Some governments began establishing rules about capital requirements, inspections, and reporting to protect depositors and maintain public confidence in the banking system. These regulations varied widely between countries and would evolve considerably over the coming decades. By the dawn of the 20th century, banking had transformed from a specialized service for the elite into an integral part of everyday economic life for millions of people. The innovations of the previous decades had laid the groundwork for the modern financial system, creating tools and practices that would prove essential as the world moved into an age of unprecedented change and challenge. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, banking had become a sophisticated machine of commerce, humming along with remarkable efficiency. Yet nothing tests the resilience of human institutions quite like conflict, and the monetary systems that had evolved so carefully over centuries were about to face their greatest challenge. When the lights began dimming across Europe in the summer of 1914, few people understood just how profoundly war would transform their relationship with money. The gold standard, that elegant system that had linked the world's currencies together like a great golden chain, was built upon a foundation of trust and stability. War shattered both. Within weeks of the First World War's outbreak, countries began suspending gold convertibility. The reason was simple and stark. Governments needed money, vast amounts of it, far more than their treasuries held. Armies required uniforms, weapons, ammunition, food, and transport on a scale never before imagined. Naval vessels consumed coal and oil. Artillery shells were manufactured by the millions. The old ways of financing government through taxation and modest borrowing proved entirely inadequate. Britain, France, Germany, and the other belligerents turned to their central banks and printing presses. Paper currency, once carefully constrained by gold reserves, began flowing in unprecedented quantities. Citizens were asked to accept these notes on faith, on patriotic duty, on the promise that when peace returned, normalcy would be restored. For the most part, they did accept them. What choice did they have? The governments also developed new financial instruments to fund the conflict. War bonds became familiar features of daily life, advertised on posters and sold at banks, encouraging citizens to lend their savings to the national effort. These bonds promised repayment with interest after the war, transforming ordinary people into creditors of their own governments. In the United States, even before entering the war, citizens bought liberty bonds in massive campaigns that mixed patriotism with investment. To raise additional funds, nations expanded their systems of taxation in ways that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. Income taxes, which had existed in limited forms in some countries, became widespread and substantial. In Britain, the income tax rate rose dramatically. In the United States, the Revenue Act of 1916 established a more progressive income tax structure, and by 1918, the top rate had climbed to levels previously considered impossible. These were emergency measures, people were told, temporary necessities of wartime. The German experience illustrated the dangers of excessive money creation most dramatically. Unable to finance the war through taxation alone, and with gold reserves depleted, Germany printed money with increasing abandon. The mark's value began eroding, though the full catastrophe would not become apparent until after the war ended. When the Treaty of Versailles imposed heavy reparation payments on the defeated nation, the German government printed still more money to meet these obligations. By 1923, hyperinflation had destroyed the currency entirely. People carried money in wheelbarrows to buy bread. Postage stamps cost billions of marks. Savings accumulated over lifetimes evaporated in weeks. It was a monetary collapse of biblical proportions, searing itself into German collective memory. Other nations faced similar challenges, though few as severe. Austria, Hungary, Poland, and Russia all experienced periods of dramatic currency devaluation in the war's aftermath. The Russian Revolution added political upheaval to economic chaos, and the new Soviet government eventually repudiated debt and created an entirely new monetary system. Even the victorious nations struggled with the war's financial legacy. Britain and France had borrowed heavily, both from their own citizens and from the United States, which emerged from the conflict as the world's leading creditor nation. The web of war debts connecting nations became a source of tension throughout the 1920s, complicated by Germany's reparation obligations and the complex question of who owed what to whom. The interwar period saw attempts to return to monetary normalcy, to restore the gold standard that had provided such stability before 1914. Britain returned to gold in 1925 at the pre-war exchange rate, a decision that proved economically painful. Other nations followed, trying to rebuild the old order, but the system never regained its former strength. The economic strains were too great, the gold reserves too unevenly distributed, and the political will too fragile. When economic depression swept the world in the 1930s, the restored gold standard crumbled again. Britain abandoned it in 1931. The United States followed in 1933, when President Franklin Roosevelt suspended gold convertibility for domestic transactions and later devalued the dollar. Nations turned inward, raising tariff barriers and managing their currencies independently, rather than as parts of an international system. The Second World War brought all these challenges back, magnified by the conflict's even greater scope and intensity. Once again, governments printed money and sold bonds. Once again, taxation increased dramatically. The United States introduced payroll withholding for income taxes in 1943, making tax collection more efficient and less painful by taking money from paychecks before workers received them. This innovation would outlast the war by many decades. The financial demands were staggering. The United States alone spent over $300 billion on the war effort, an almost incomprehensible sum at the time. Britain, despite its smaller economy, devoted even larger proportions of its national resources to the conflict. The Soviet Union, Germany, and Japan similarly mobilized their entire economies. Through all this turmoil, something remarkable happened. People's understanding of money evolved. The direct link between currency and precious metal, once considered essential to monetary legitimacy, had been broken repeatedly and never fully restored. Citizens had learned to accept paper money and even check deposits as perfectly legitimate forms of payment, backed not by gold in a vault, but by government authority and economic productivity. The wars had also demonstrated that governments could manage money supply actively, printing more when needed, even if this carried risks of inflation. Central banks had become more than mere guardians of gold reserves. They were active participants in economic management. As the Second World War drew to its conclusion, representatives from the Allied nations gathered in a resort town in New Hampshire to design a new monetary order, one that would learn from the mistakes and disasters of the previous decades. They sought to create stability without rigidity, international cooperation without the vulnerabilities that had plagued the gold standard. The world of money was about to enter yet another new chapter, shaped profoundly by the harsh lessons learned in times of conflict. As the smoke cleared from the battlefields and the world surveyed the immense destruction left behind by years of conflict, leaders and economists gathered with a singular purpose: to ensure that the monetary chaos that had contributed to economic collapse and global conflict would never happen again. The place they chose for this momentous meeting was Bretton Woods, a small resort town nestled in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, far from the ruins of war-torn Europe and Asia. In July of 1944, while fighting still raged in parts of the world, delegates from 44 nations assembled at the Mount Washington Hotel. The Grand Hotel, with its white colonial facade and sweeping views of the presidential range, provided a tranquil setting for discussions that would reshape the global financial landscape. For 3 weeks, these representatives worked through the summer heat, debating, negotiating, and designing a new monetary order that would govern international finance for decades to come. The architects of this new system faced a delicate challenge. The gold standard that had once provided stability had broken down completely during the economic turmoil between the wars. Nations had engaged in competitive devaluations of their currencies, each trying to gain advantage in international trade by making their money cheaper. This race to the bottom had contributed to the economic desperation that fed political extremism and conflict. Yet returning to the old system seemed impossible in a world where gold reserves had become concentrated in just a few nations, particularly the United States. Two economists emerged as the dominant voices at Bretton Woods. John Maynard Keynes, representing Britain, arrived with bold ideas for a new international currency he called the Bancor, that would exist independently of any single nation. Harry Dexter White, representing the United States, proposed a system centered on the American dollar. The debates between these two brilliant minds and the delegations they represented would determine the shape of post-war finance. In the end, economic reality shaped the outcome as much as economic theory. The United States had emerged from the war as the world's dominant economic power, holding approximately 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. American factories were intact and productive while much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. The dollar had become the currency that everyone wanted, the one that could buy the goods and materials needed for reconstruction. It made a certain practical sense then to build the new monetary system around this already dominant currency. The agreement reached at Bretton Woods established what came to be known as a gold exchange standard. The United States would maintain the convertibility of dollars to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Other nations would peg their currencies to the dollar at fixed exchange rates, which could be adjusted only in cases of fundamental economic imbalance. In effect, the dollar became as good as gold in international transactions, and other currencies established their value in relation to this anchor. The system created at Bretton Woods also brought into being two new international institutions. The International Monetary Fund would oversee the system of fixed exchange rates, provide temporary financial assistance to countries facing balance of payments difficulties, and serve as a forum for monetary cooperation. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which would become known as the World Bank, would provide longer-term loans for rebuilding war-damaged economies and developing infrastructure in less industrialized nations. As this new monetary architecture took shape and spread across the world in the years following the conference, it facilitated an era of remarkable economic expansion. The fixed exchange rates provided stability and predictability for international trade and investment. Businesses could plan long-term ventures without worrying that currency fluctuations would suddenly make their calculations meaningless. The availability of dollars, backed by the promise of gold convertibility, gave international commerce a reliable medium of exchange that nearly everyone would accept. European nations, their cities rebuilt, and their industries modernized with help from American aid programs, experienced what became known as the economic miracle of rapid growth and rising prosperity. Japan transformed itself from a defeated military power into an industrial powerhouse. International trade expanded at unprecedented rates, connecting distant economies in ever more intricate webs of exchange. The Bretton Woods system provided the monetary foundation for this flourishing of commerce and cooperation. Yet within this success lay the seeds of the system's eventual undoing. As other economies recovered and grew strong, they began accumulating dollars through their trade surpluses. These dollars represented claims on American gold, and gradually the amount of dollars held abroad began to exceed the gold reserves held by the United States. The system worked smoothly, so long as everyone maintained confidence that dollars could indeed be converted to gold if necessary. But that confidence rested on a mathematical impossibility that became more apparent with each passing year. The costs of maintaining global military commitments and fighting a war in Southeast Asia further strained American finances during the 1960s. The United States began running persistent budget deficits and printing more dollars to cover its expenses. Foreign central banks, watching their dollar reserves grow and aware that American gold reserves remained fixed, began to wonder whether the promise of convertibility could truly be maintained. Some began testing that promise, exchanging their dollars for gold, and watching American gold reserves decline. By the early 1970s, the tension had become unsustainable. On an August Sunday in 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television to announce that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at the established rate. The central pillar of the Bretton Woods system had been removed, though the name Bretton Woods would linger for a few more years as nations attempted to maintain some version of fixed exchange rates. The system created at that mountain resort in 1944 had effectively come to an end. The Bretton Woods era had lasted just over a quarter century, but its influence on how we think about international money and economic cooperation extended far beyond its technical lifespan. It demonstrated that nations could work together to create shared monetary frameworks. It showed that stability in currency values facilitated prosperity and growth. And perhaps most significantly, it marked the final step in the long journey away from money, backed by physical commodities, towards something more abstract, more flexible, and ultimately more dependent on collective trust and agreement. The world that would emerge from Bretton Woods' collapse would need to discover new ways of managing money in an era when gold no longer anchored its value, when currencies floated freely against one another like boats on an open sea. As the structures established at Bretton Woods began to show their age and strain under the pressures of a changing world economy, the early 1970s marked a profound transformation in the very nature of money itself. The dollar's connection to gold, that final thread linking modern currency to ancient precious metals, was about to be severed forever. On a quiet Sunday evening in August 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television screens across America to announce a decision that would reshape the global financial landscape. The United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at the fixed rate of $35 per ounce. This temporary suspension of gold convertibility became permanent, and with it, the world entered a new monetary era. Money would now rest not on stockpiles of glittering metal locked in vault after vault, but on something far more abstract: the faith and authority of governments themselves. This shift to what economists call fiat currency was not entirely unprecedented. The word fiat comes from Latin, meaning "let it be done," a reference to government decree. Throughout history, rulers had occasionally issued money by proclamation alone, but never before had the entire global system operated on this principle simultaneously. The money in your pocket, the numbers in bank accounts, the figures that represented wealth and debt across nations, all now derive their value from collective agreement and government backing, rather than convertibility into something tangible and precious. The transition brought both opportunities and challenges that would define modern economics. Central banks suddenly found themselves with powerful new tools. No longer constrained by gold reserves, they could expand or contract the money supply with greater flexibility, responding to economic conditions in ways that had been impossible under the gold standard. When economies slowed, central banks could lower interest rates and increase the amount of money in circulation, encouraging spending and investment. When inflation threatened, they could do the reverse, raising interest rates and tightening the money supply. This newfound flexibility came at a price, one measured in the subtle erosion of purchasing power over time. With nothing to anchor currency values, the temptation to create more money proved difficult for many governments to resist. Throughout the 1970s and early 80s, inflation became a familiar companion to daily life in much of the world. Prices that had remained relatively stable for generations began climbing steadily upward. A cup of coffee, a loaf of bread, a gallon of fuel all cost more with each passing year. Workers negotiated for higher wages to keep pace, and those wages then fed back into higher prices, creating spirals that sometimes seemed difficult to control. The experience taught central bankers important lessons about managing fiat currencies. They learned that credibility mattered immensely. If people believed that a central bank would act responsibly, keeping inflation moderate and stable, then the currency would hold its value better than if people worried about reckless money creation. This insight gave rise to a new emphasis on central bank independence, the idea that monetary authorities should be insulated from short-term political pressures that might tempt governments to print money rather than make difficult fiscal choices. Different nations approach this new monetary landscape in different ways. Some, like Germany, remain deeply cautious about inflation, their collective memory scarred by the hyperinflation of the 1920s. The German Bundesbank became known for its strict approach to monetary policy, prioritizing price stability above all else. Others experimented with various frameworks, trying to find the right balance between promoting economic growth and maintaining stable prices. The mathematics of inflation in a fiat system created interesting paradoxes. A modest amount of inflation, perhaps 2 or 3% annually, became accepted as normal and even desirable by many economists. This gentle erosion of purchasing power encouraged people to invest and spend rather than hoard cash, keeping money flowing through the economy. It also made real debts shrink over time, easing the burden on borrowers while gradually reducing the real value of what lenders received back. In this way, inflation acted as a kind of invisible tax, redistributing wealth in subtle ways that would have been impossible under a gold standard. Central banks developed increasingly sophisticated tools to manage their fiat currencies. Interest rates became the primary instrument, raised or lowered in careful increments to influence borrowing, spending, and investment throughout the economy. Banks would meet regularly, analyzing vast amounts of economic data, employment figures, price indices, trade balances, all to make decisions that would ripple through millions of lives. A quarter-point change in interest rates might seem small, but it affected mortgage payments, business loans, the return on savings, and the attractiveness of investing in one currency versus another. The foreign exchange markets grew enormous under this new system. Without fixed rates tied to gold, currencies floated against one another, their values determined by constant trading in global markets that never slept. A dollar might buy more or fewer yen, euros, or pounds depending on economic conditions, interest rate differentials, political stability, and countless other factors. Traders watched screens filled with flickering numbers, buying and selling currencies in volumes that dwarfed the actual trade in goods and services. The daily turnover in foreign exchange markets eventually reached trillions of dollars, most of it speculative trading rather than commerce in physical products. This floating exchange rate system created both stability and volatility in unexpected ways. Countries no longer faced the stark choice of defending a fixed rate or watching their gold reserves drain away. Exchange rates could adjust gradually to reflect economic realities, yet currencies could also swing wildly based on sentiment and speculation, creating uncertainty for businesses engaged in international trade and investment. Some nations found the volatility troubling enough that they sought to anchor their currencies to more stable references. Many developing countries pegged their money to the dollar or maintained currency boards that strictly limited money creation. Others formed currency unions, most notably the European Union's adoption of the euro at the turn of the millennium, which replaced the marks, francs, lira, and pesetas with a single currency managed by a new European central bank. As decades passed under this fiat system, people gradually forgot that money had ever been different. The idea that paper bills or digital numbers might be exchangeable for gold became a historical curiosity, something their grandparents might remember, but which seemed quaint and unnecessary to younger generations. Money was simply money, accepted because everyone accepted it, valuable because collective agreement made it so. The system worked as long as trust endured, as long as central banks maintained their credibility. as long as governments resisted the temptation to abuse their power to create money without limit. This transformation to fiat currency set the stage for even more dramatic changes to come. Once money became purely abstract, backed by authority rather than commodity, the path opened for it to become entirely digital, existing not even as printed paper, but as pure information flowing through electronic networks at the speed of light. As the world emerged from the era of purely paper-based fiat currency, a quiet revolution began reshaping the very nature of money itself. The transformation happened gradually at first, then with breathtaking speed as money shed its physical form and became something that existed primarily as glowing numbers on screens and electrical impulses traveling through wires at the speed of light. The story of this digital revolution truly began in the 1950s and 1960s when banks started using large mainframe computers to keep track of their accounts. These room-sized machines, with their spinning tape reels and blinking lights, could process transactions far faster than any human bookkeeper. What once required ledgers and careful handwriting now happened in electronic silence, as magnetic storage devices recorded deposits and withdrawals. The money itself hadn't changed yet, but the way it was counted and tracked had entered a new age. In 1958, Bank of America launched an experiment in Fresno, California, that would transform how people thought about spending money. They sent small plastic cards to 60,000 residents, each card embossed with the holder's name and account number. These cards, which came to be known as credit cards, allowed people to make purchases without carrying cash. Merchants would place the card in a mechanical imprinter, slide a handle across it, and create a carbon copy receipt. At the end of each day, these receipts would be collected and processed, with money moving between accounts invisibly through banking networks. The Bank AmeriCard, as it was called, would eventually become Visa, and the concept spread across the nation and then the world. The magnetic stripe, added to the back of credit cards in the 1960s, marked another leap forward. This simple brown strip contained the same information that was embossed on the front, but now it could be read by machines. When you slid your card through a reader, it could instantly verify your account and authorize a transaction. Money was becoming not just a number in a ledger, but information that could be transmitted and processed electronically. The automated teller machine, or ATM, arrived on city streets in the late 1960s and early 1970s, giving people access to their money any time of day or night. The first ATMs were simple devices that dispensed cash in exchange for special paper vouchers, but they quickly evolved to use plastic cards with magnetic stripes and personal identification numbers. Standing before these machines, customers could withdraw cash, check their balances, and make deposits without ever speaking to a human teller. The money in your account was no longer something you needed to visit a bank during business hours to access. It had become available whenever you needed it, summoned from electronic vaults by the push of a few buttons. Through the 1970s and 1980s, electronic funds transfer systems grew more sophisticated. Wire transfers, which had existed in simple forms using telegraphs since the 19th century, became instantaneous. The SWIFT network, established in 1973, created a standardized system for banks worldwide to communicate with each other and move money across borders. A business in Tokyo could pay a supplier in London, and the funds would arrive within hours, traveling as encrypted messages through undersea cables and satellite links. The physical movement of gold or paper currency was no longer necessary for international commerce. Debit cards emerged as another evolution in the 1980s, connecting directly to checking accounts and allowing people to spend money they actually had rather than borrowing with credit. When you bought groceries with a debit card, the money left your account immediately, transferred electronically to the store's account. The experience felt similar to using a credit card, but the underlying flow of money was fundamentally different, more akin to handing over cash, except that no physical currency ever changed hands. The personal computer revolution of the 1980s and 1990s brought banking into homes and offices. Financial software allowed people to track their spending, balance their checkbooks, and eventually connect directly to their banks through telephone modems. Those early connections were slow, with screeching sounds as the modem negotiated its link, but they represented something unprecedented. For the first time, you could check your account balance, pay bills, and transfer money between accounts without leaving your desk. Money had become something you could interact with through a keyboard and mouse, displayed in neat columns on a glowing screen. The internet transformed this digital evolution into a revolution. As the World Wide Web spread through homes and businesses in the mid-1990s, online banking went from a novelty to an expectation. Websites allowed customers to perform virtually any banking transaction electronically. The need to visit a physical bank branch became increasingly rare. Bills could be paid with a few clicks. Paychecks arrived as direct deposits, never existing as paper at all. Money was becoming purely abstract, a numerical representation of value that moved through fiber optic cables as pulses of light. Electronic commerce, or e-commerce, created entirely new ways to spend this digital money. Companies like Amazon and eBay built vast marketplaces where goods could be bought and sold with nothing more than typing in a credit card number or linking a bank account. Payment processing companies like PayPal emerged to facilitate these transactions, holding money electronically and transferring it between buyers and sellers. A person in Australia could buy a handmade item from someone in Argentina, and the money would flow between them in seconds, converted automatically from one currency to another. Mobile phones brought another transformation in the early 21st century. As smartphones became ubiquitous, they evolved into portable banking terminals. Apps allowed people to deposit checks by photographing them, to transfer money to friends with a few taps, to pay for purchases by holding their phone near a reader. In some countries, particularly in Africa and Asia, mobile money systems allowed people who had never had bank accounts to store and transfer money using simple text messages. Money had become something that lived in your pocket, accessible anywhere you could get a cellular signal. By the second decade of the 21st century, the vast majority of money existed only in digital form. When governments reported the money supply, they were mostly counting electronic records in databases. The physical cash in circulation represented only a small fraction of the total money in the economy. Most transactions happened without any physical currency changing hands. Trillions of dollars, euros, yen, and other currencies moved around the world every day as electronic signals, facilitating trade, paying salaries, and funding businesses. This digital transformation had made money faster, more convenient, and more accessible than ever before. It had also made it more abstract. The younger generations grew up rarely handling physical currency, their concept of money shaped by numbers on screens rather than coins and bills in hand. The technology had become so seamless that it was easy to forget that these glowing numbers represented real value, the product of human labor and resources. As this chapter of money's evolution reached its maturity, new questions began to emerge about what money truly was and who should control it. The same technology that had digitized traditional currency was about to enable something entirely new, a form of money that would challenge the very foundations of how currencies had worked for thousands of years. As the digital age transformed money into streams of electronic data flowing through computer networks, something unexpected was taking shape in the minds of mathematicians and cryptographers. They had been pondering a question that seemed almost philosophical. Could money exist without banks, without governments, without any central authority at all? Could a form of currency emerge that belonged to everyone and no one simultaneously? The answer arrived quietly on October the 31st, 2008, when someone using the name Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page document online titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The timing was significant. The world was in the midst of a severe financial crisis, and trust in traditional banking institutions had been badly shaken. Into this uncertain landscape came a proposal for an entirely new kind of money. Bitcoin, as Nakamoto described it, would be a digital currency with no central issuer, no bank to hold it, and no government to back it. Instead, it would exist as entries in a shared digital ledger that anyone could view, but no one could manipulate. This ledger, called a blockchain, would be maintained not by a single institution, but by thousands of computers around the world, all working together to verify transactions and ensure the system's integrity. The blockchain technology underlying Bitcoin was elegantly simple in concept, yet sophisticated in execution. Imagine a book of transactions that is copied and stored on countless computers simultaneously. Every time someone wants to send Bitcoin to another person, that transaction is broadcast to the network. Special participants called miners then compete to bundle these transactions into blocks, solving complex mathematical puzzles in the process. Once a block is completed, it is added to the chain of all previous blocks, creating a permanent, unchangeable record. What made this system revolutionary was that it solved a problem that had plagued earlier attempts at digital currency: how to prevent someone from spending the same digital coin twice. With physical money, you hand over a bill and you no longer have it. But digital files can be copied endlessly. Bitcoin's blockchain solved this by creating a single, universally agreed upon record of who owns what. The system required no trust in any particular institution, because the mathematics and the distributed network of computers provided the security. On January the 3rd, 2009, Nakamoto mined the first block of Bitcoin, known as the Genesis block. Embedded in its code was a headline from that day's London Times: Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. Whether this was commentary, timestamp, or both, it anchored Bitcoin to a moment when faith in traditional financial systems was wavering. In those early days, Bitcoin was more curiosity than currency. The first real-world transaction came in May 2010, when a programmer in Florida paid 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 pizzas. At the time, this seemed a reasonable price for dinner. Years later, when Bitcoin's value had risen dramatically, those became known as the most expensive pizzas in history, a reminder of how quickly perceptions of value can shift. Bitcoin inspired the creation of thousands of other cryptocurrencies, each with different features and purposes. Ethereum, launched in 2015, expanded on Bitcoin's technology to allow for smart contracts, self-executing agreements written in code. Others focused on privacy, transaction speed, or serving specific communities. The collective term cryptocurrency came to describe this new category of digital assets secured by cryptographic techniques. Traditional financial institutions watch these developments with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. Some dismissed cryptocurrencies as speculative bubbles with no real value. Others recognized the potential of the underlying blockchain technology and began exploring how it might be adapted for conventional banking purposes. Major companies started to accept cryptocurrency payments, and exchanges emerged where people could trade traditional currencies for digital ones. Governments and regulatory agencies found themselves facing questions they had never encountered before. How should cryptocurrencies be classified? Were they currencies, commodities, or securities? How could transactions be monitored for illegal activities when the system was designed to operate without central control? Different nations answered these questions in different ways. Some embraced the technology and worked to create supportive regulations. Others banned cryptocurrency trading altogether. The volatility of cryptocurrency values became legendary. Bitcoin's price could rise or fall by thousands of dollars in a single day, driven by factors ranging from regulatory announcements to social media posts. This volatility made cryptocurrencies attractive to speculators, but problematic as stable mediums of exchange or stores of value, the traditional functions that money is meant to serve. In response to these concerns, developers created stablecoins, cryptocurrencies, designed to maintain a steady value by being pegged to traditional currencies or other assets. Central banks, too, began exploring the possibility of issuing their own digital currencies. China advanced furthest with this concept, testing a digital yuan that combines the efficiency of cryptocurrency technology with the stability and control of government-issued money. The philosophical questions surrounding cryptocurrency cut to the heart of what money represents. Throughout history, successful currencies have required trust. People needed to trust that the coins were genuine, that the paper notes would be honored, that the banks were solvent, that the government would maintain value. Cryptocurrency proposed a different foundation. Trust not in institutions, but in mathematics. Not in central authority, but in distributed consensus. As we rest here in this present moment, the story of money continues to unfold in ways both predictable and surprising. Some envision a future where cryptocurrencies replace traditional money entirely, where international transactions happen instantly without intermediaries, where financial systems are transparent and accessible to everyone. Others see digital currencies as complementary tools that will coexist alongside conventional money. each serving different purposes. What seems certain is that money will continue to evolve, as it has throughout human history, from shells and salt to gold coins and paper notes, from bank ledgers to electronic transfers. Each transformation reflected the needs and technologies of its time. The emergence of cryptocurrency represents not an endpoint, but another chapter in humanity's ongoing conversation about value, trust, and exchange. The future of money remains unwritten, shaped by innovations we can only begin to imagine, and decisions yet to be made. And so our long journey through the story of money comes to rest here in this quiet moment, with systems ancient and modern intertwined, and tomorrow's possibilities stretching ahead into the peaceful darkness. As we bring to a close our journey through the remarkable story of money, from the first exchanges of shells and grain to the digital currencies that flow invisibly through our modern world, we hope this exploration has gently carried you through the evening. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful voyage through time. If these calm adventures have brought you comfort, we'd love to have you with us again. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below to help other smart sleepers find their way here. And now, as the night deepens and your mind settles into quietness, we wish you the sweetest of dreams. Good night, fellow dreamer, and may your sleep be restful and your dreams be kind.